They don't have Taylor Swift tickets they want to sell me? Massachusetts shows? Not for $12,000, which is the current going rate.
So back up. So I was watching this, and it happened through Christina Warren, former and one of the only guests ever on the show, former guest Christina Warren, and dear friend of the show. Anyways, I was watching her, try to do her whole rigmarole in order to get herself Taylor Swift tickets. So my limited understanding is you got in some sort of queue, and it said there's 2,000 or more people in front of you. And then she had retweeted out, I doubt I'll be able to find it, but she had retweeted somebody saying, in the time I've spent in the queue, I wrote a Chrome extension to figure out exactly where you are in the queue, which is amazing.
The queue that she was in, I didn't even get a chance to enter that queue because I lost that lottery. But today there was another queue that I could get in, and rather than download that Chrome extension, I just opened the Chrome DevTools and looked at the JSON flying by. I was telling Marco this before, and yeah, you can see where you actually are in the queue. Not that helps you. It's like, oh great, now I know. I started at 15,000 and I'm around 10,000, even though the UI says 2,000 plus. But that doesn't tell you anything. Like the rate at which that number went down varied wildly. Like it went down like thousands in 15 minutes and then didn't budge for like an hour and then went down 3 and in the next 15. It's just, I don't know what it's based on. We had multiple windows going here with the same thing, different accounts. Anyway, the queue closed, and they said, "Sorry, all the things that we had reserved for the people who are supposed to buy tickets today was like Capital One credit card holders. Sorry, we sold all of those out. So even though you're still in line, tough luck. See you later." So Friday is my next chance, and my next and final chance. And Friday is the day that everybody gets a chance to be in the queue. So if I couldn't get in the queue and just competing against Capital One credit card holders, I don't know what I'm going to do on Friday.
So you would say, John, that John is a Swiftie. I think that's what we're learning today.
The tickets are not for me, although I do like Taylor Swift's music.
Fair enough. I mean, I think the answer here is like the price of seeing Taylor Swift is just whatever it takes to buy these like on StubHub or whatever. Like that's the reality here. It's like it's not whatever the list price is. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like it's like a handful of lucky people will get the list price. For the most part, you're competing with a whole bunch of bots and scammers probably, and resellers and scalpers, and so you're going to have to be either very lucky or play that game.
Well, yeah, but like the actual going rate for tickets for these shows is, I'm not kidding, like $11,000 or $12,000 right now.
So my word!
I'm not paying that.
Well, but that's right now. Wait until the shows are like 2 weeks away, and it'll be different.
Yeah, we'll see.
Like because right now no one has the tickets yet, so everyone's like, oh my god, I need to buy one. But like give time for all of the actual tickets to be acquired by people, and then a week or two before the show, you can probably pick them up for, maybe a few $100. I don't know.
This is what I get for not being... Well, a few $100 is lower than the actual price, by the way, Marco.
Oh my God. What's the actual price?
So I believe it's... if you want floor seats, I had this info before. Let me look it up for you so you can be suitably shocked. This is not the scalper price. This is the
list price.
For the price if you buy it from Ticketmaster.
Is floor more desirable or less?
Yes, the floor seats start at $350 and go up to $900. That's not the scalper price. That's the just straight up price, right? And then the other sections are in the other ranges, as you would imagine. They have a $200 to $300 range, and if you're in the bleachers at the top of a football stadium, it's $50 to $100. So it varies from basically $1,000 for your best seat to $50 for your worst, and they cover every price range in between. And that is again not the scalper price. That is the price that you pay if you're lucky enough to get a ticket at the actual retail price.
I am so happy to be a Phish fan right now.
That is utterly bananas.
Yeah, Phish has a few more shows and is a slightly less popular than Taylor Swift.
A little, maybe.
All right, let's do some follow-up. Tell me about what you made many mistakes with your phone transition. We got some feedback about it. I am a little annoyed at myself that I didn't yell 1Password repeatedly while you were telling the story, because if you had your...
Don't worry, plenty of other people did.
Okay, good. But there are other approaches you could have taken with regard to moving your 2FA stuff from one phone to the other. Can you tell me about this?
Well, speaking of 1Password, though, I did mention on the show, I thought every time I get all this feedback, I'm like, did Marco edit this out? This is the thought I always have when the feedback starts coming in. I'm like, did Marco edit this out? And the answer is almost always, no, he didn't edit out. People just haven't gotten to that part in the show yet. Right?
But that almost is how I keep you on your toes.
Yeah. Or they just didn't hear me when I said it. But, I do have the two-factor stuff on more than one device. The reason I didn't want to just why didn't you just take the phone, bring it home, and, blah, blah. Well, then there's two things to that. One is I did want to do the device-to-device transfer because based on my last experience, I have learned that that is the best way to do it, and I don't want to have to sign into everything. So restoring from an iCloud backup is not as good, it seems like, as device-to-device transfer. So I still have to do the device-to-device transfer. But secondly, yeah, I've got it on another device, but like the whole point of redundancy is not to, 2 is 1, 1 is none. If I only have it on one other device, I don't want to also have that device be screwed up. Like I don't want to risk it. Like say I hit the wrong button when I'm trying to do the export or whatever, and I delete it instead of exporting it. Now I've just destroyed my one and only backup of that stuff. So that's why, and yes, lots of things sync. iCloud keychain syncs, 1Password syncs, all these things. There's tons and tons of two-factor apps. I probably will eventually get everything into iCloud keychain because that's kind of where I'm going with this. Now that it syncs and now that it supports two-factor stuff, I just haven't gotten around to it. So anyway, setting that aside, what if you just don't want to do this whole thing of like sitting in the Apple Store for hours? There are other options, and I could have pursued these, which involve not going to an Apple Store and just doing it on the telephone, right? I mostly went to the Apple Store because I wanted to talk to a human, and I needed to see another iPhone 14 Pro to convince myself, is there something wrong with my camera or is it just me being weird and picky? And that's why I needed to get hands-on a ostensibly working 14 Pro to compare, and also to talk to the person in the Apple Store who sees these phones all day and say, does this look like it's broken to you, or does it just look like that's what they're all like? And that's not the type of thing I can do over the phone with somebody. I could have convinced the person over the phone to say, look, I just think the camera's bad. You need to send me a replacement. But anyway, the reason the phone comes up is if you do it over the phone, you can get them to overnight you a device, and then you can do the data transfer at your leisure in your house and then send it back. And I believe they just charge your credit card or authorize your credit card for the purchase. So if you don't send it back, you're out the money. Particles on Twitter said that if you get AppleCare Plus with theft and loss protection, you get the express replacement. I think they probably still authorize your credit card. I'm not sure if express replacement is only for if you have theft and loss. I'm pretty sure you can get them to cross-ship you something if you are convincing enough over the telephone. What I am kind of disappointed in is when I was complaining about that I had to spend 3 hours in the Apple Store, the Apple Store employee never said, oh, well, if you don't want to do that, now that we've gone through the whole rigmarole and I've tested your phone and brought it into the back and we tried, now that we did all that, you don't have to get it replaced here. You can just go home and call them on the phone. And that's probably what I should have done. They didn't say that to me. I don't have theft and loss protection, so maybe that's why they didn't say that to me. But either way, next time I do it, I have many other options. I can, by that point, have moved all my two-factor stuff to something that syncs, it depends on what the problem is. If I don't have a camera issue that I need to see in person, I could just do it all over the phone and have them cross-ship me something. Anyway, so just FYI, if you don't want to spend 3 hours in the Apple Store listening to people tell Apple Store employees about their computer problems, consider doing it over the phone.
And then we could even set up a special Apple Watch face for you when you're in the Apple Store. Do you want to tell me about that?
I don't have an Apple. I do have an Apple Watch. I wonder if it's so dead that it won't boot anymore. I should take it out and try it. And my Series Zero, my awesome looking Series Zero, still lurking in my drawer. Anyway, Alex Siri wrote in to tell us, I enjoyed the episode with the PSA about customizing complications on Apple Watch faces, and I wanted to share one more cool thing with watch faces. You can change them with personal automations in the Shortcuts app. Every Friday at 5 p.m., my watch automatically switches to the weekend face, and every Sunday at 9 p.m., it switches to the weekday face. These both run without intervention and without any extraneous notifications. And what's especially cool is that any automation that you can trigger in Shortcuts can be used. So an event like arriving at a location or connecting to a specific Bluetooth device can cause a change to your watch face. It might be something Marco could use to switch over to sand driving watch face when he gets in the car or just when he arrives at the beach. That is cool. Like Shortcuts, one of the great powerful features of it is that Shortcuts can do things you don't have to trigger them. Like they can do things based on environmental factors that they are aware of. And having your watch face kind of automatically change based on your location or time of day or day of the week is kind of a cool thing if you do have multiple watch faces and you don't want to bother like swiping between them manually.
Excellent. Matt Friedman writes, with regard to why bother with the new Apple TV, if anybody still has a first-gen Apple TV 4K, a second or third-gen model will allow them to watch HDR on YouTube without having to swap back to the TV's native YouTube app, which may or may not support it depending on the age of your TV. which is pretty cool.
I didn't even realize that I had totally forgotten that there was a second or third gen Apple TV 4Ks. We were talking on Twitter about this, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I got HDR in YouTube app. Like, that's what I was using to demo, like, when I got my new TV or whatever. Like, I didn't need the brand new Apple TV 4K, like the smaller one that we were just talking about last show. I didn't need that to watch HDR. So I was like, but you didn't have the second gen model. You had the second gen, not the first gen. I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, there was apparently a first gen Apple TV 4K, and for whatever reason, it didn't get HDR in YouTube. That's what the problem with these product lines. I mean, not that I endorse the idea of having something in parentheses to differentiate them, but the generation names are kind of worse than the year number because I had totally forgotten about that one. So if you're wondering, hey, I already have an Apple TV 4K, why the heck would I want this new one that's slightly smaller? If you have a first gen Apple TV 4K and you care at all about HDR on the YouTube app, get one of the new ones.
Good talk. Jacob writes, with regard to using multiple smart albums to work around the lack of nested Boolean logic in macOS's Photos smart albums, unfortunately, Photos doesn't allow you to reference another smart album into smart album's conditions. Whoopsie-doopsies.
I couldn't believe that. I would have to go double check it and see if it was true. It's like, why? Like, things are so weird and limited. Like, that has to be possible. Like, that's the awkward workaround we talked about. But no, he's right. It's not possible. It'll let you reference, I think it'll let you reference an album, but not a smart album. Smart albums are so weird. Like, iOS has no idea that they exist, and they're just so powerful and cool. I wish they would, like, get first-class treatment across all of Apple's platforms.
If only. This is a U2 topic. Would you like to cover this, actually?
Sure. Aram wrote in to say, maybe the YouTube album removal page fell away because Apple added the ability to hide purchases. We'll put a link in the show notes to a support article that lets you, like, just basically pick anything in your library, your iTunes library, and just hide it. Removing from an account requires contacting support, but this is a non-destructive solution that is enough for almost everybody. So if you listen to the last show and you're like, oh no, I've got the YouTube album and the delete page is gone, what do? I don't want to call support. You can just hide it and then forget that it exists.
We are brought to you this week by Linode, my favorite place to run servers. Visit linode.com/ATP and see why Linode has been voted the top infrastructure as a service provider by both G2 and TrustRadius. I host all of my servers at Linode because, frankly, they just make it really easy and they're a fantastic value. So, value, I can't say enough how great of a value they are. We'll start there. It is incredible. What you get at Linode, what you're paying for the resource levels you have is unmatched in the industry. And I've been with them for a very long time, many years now, and they've always been the best value in the business. I've never found anybody better than them. And then capability-wise, they have pretty much everything you might want to run servers these days. So, of course, they have cloud instances, what used to be called VPSs or server instances. They have any kind of resource level you might need, from very small and inexpensive to very big or very specialized needs. So high memory plans, dedicated CPU plans, GPU compute plans, and more. And they also have now managed services too. So they recently launched their managed database service. This supports MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, and so much more coming in the future. And they have things like managed backups, managed load balancers, all sorts of block storage, object storage, which is S3 compatible, and so much more. All of this at Linode, and it's just an amazing value to price per compute. And they have all this backed by great support, a great API, a great interface for managing stuff. So I have nothing bad to say about Linode. I've used them for a very long time. I pay for them out of my own pocket. Like, they don't comp my servers or anything. I pay for it all myself, and it is an incredible value. I'm there very happily. So visit linode.com/ATP, create a free account there, and you get $100 in credit. Once again, linode.com/ATP. New accounts there get $100 in credit. Thank you so much to Linode for being a great place to run my servers and for sponsoring our show.
Elon Musk has decided to fire basically any Twitter employee that criticizes him because he is the thinnest skinned human that has ever lived.
It was kind of another day. I forget which day it was. Another day on Twitter watching the Elon Musk drama, and he was saying stupid things. Spouting
like
off
every
the
day.
way. Yeah, spouting off the way you would expect, like, a teenager who has just learned to program would spout off about some big company, right? Only he owns the company, but he's like, these dummies, they're doing this. The reason this is slow is because of X, Y, Z. And then one of the engineers who works on the thing that he was talking about said, actually, that's not true. Here's the actual situation, and laid out in a series of, I thought, very polite and concise, technically accurate tweets from a developer who knows. Here's the actual situation. And then Elon Musk said later that he fired that guy, and he did. because he didn't like being. And then all of the Elon fanboys were like, "That's what happens if you publicly contradict the boss. You should say that stuff in private. Like don't contradict the CEO of your company on Twitter and just publicly embarrass him." Well, A, if he's doing an embarrassing thing, he's really just embarrassing himself. And B, I would hope that publicly correcting the CEO of your company is not an immediately fireable offense, but apparently in Twitter it is, right? And so then the obvious follow-up to that is people who are saying mean things about Elon Musk on Twitter's internal Slack also fired. Because Elon asked a bunch of people to go through all the messages on the internal Slack and find all the people who said mean things about them and fire them. And so they got an email at 1:30 a.m. telling them that they were no longer employed by Twitter. God. He's a big jerk and a dummy head, and he does hilariously like sort of comic book villain, comic book petulant villain, like Dr. Evil. Like, I don't even know. It really boggles my mind that people can still find something to not admire in just like a petulant, thin-skinned billionaire bully. But here he is doing what he does.
I'm starting to try to figure out like what has made his other companies successful.
Delegation, baby. That's what.
Does he though? Like it seems like he has made a lot of good bets in like what to invest in and what direction to go in. Like, he wasn't the original founder of Tesla, but like, he got in super early, kind of took it over, probably
kicked out the actual founders. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know the details, but like basically like, so he got in there early. And I think Tesla, I think he really benefited that company. Like his direction and his boldness in a lot of ways, I think really helped Tesla product-wise.
And his ability to get them enough money so they didn't go out of business. I think that is the key thing that he brought to the table, because without him scrambling for money, or, again, another person who was equally good at scrambling for money, because that is a skill that a lot of people have, finding a way to keep the company afloat by any means necessary, including lying, which he's in trouble for with the SEC. But whatever, he did what it took to make sure Tesla did not go out of business.
Yeah, but it just seems like the things that succeed are in spite of him, not because of him. And that for people in these companies to produce good work, they're almost just kind of using him as like the bank and like, the guy who gets the money from investors / lying to the stock market.
And they also have to learn how to navigate him. They also have to, like, the companies that are able to succeed with him running them are filled with people who have learned how to get the job done within the parameters laid out by him. What those parameters might be, and I'm sure they change from company to company. Right now, the parameters are: if you say anything mean about me, I fire you. So if you are inside Twitter and you're like, I really want Twitter to succeed, how do I make that happen? You'd have to learn to navigate the environment in which, if you ever say anything mean or contradictory to your boss, even when your boss is totally wrong, you're going to get fired. So figure out how to navigate that, and then figure out how to succeed despite that. I don't think he's necessarily always been like that, but right now at Twitter, that's what he's like. So those are the parameters, and those parameters suck.
What gave me hope initially is when you look at the list of his other companies, as I said a few episodes ago, like he tries to solve hard problems, and running a giant social network, especially one that doesn't print money and needs a lot of help in that department. But you just running a giant social network is a hugely hard problem, and I think the difference here is that the really hard problems in his other companies were mostly engineering problems or
financial problems.
Yeah, like problems getting difficult things to market, things that are difficult to make, getting them to market and keeping the lights on and keeping the money coming in. Those are hard problems. Running a social network that's already established is not mostly an engineering problem. It's mostly a people problem. And he is just the worst with people. He is horrendously bad. And every week, every day, every hour, he finds new ways to be horrendously bad with dealing with people, both his own people and the public. And I'm having a really hard time seeing how this ends well, because there is no engineering product to make here that is the final product. There is no like, all right, we succeeded in building the rocket hover car or whatever. Like, there is no end here like that, the way there is with those other companies. This is just something very difficult. This is like running a messy political human set of human problems of humans, and he's even worse than Google at dealing with like human problems. Like he is so like disgustingly bad at dealing with people. And this latest thing, with the email of like, better be prepared to work 24/7 or get fired. Like, God, I'm so mad about that.
Yep.
Well, so we'll put links in the show notes to both these. First is a New York Times article about the firing people who criticize them. The next is a Washington Post article. The headline is Musk issues ultimatum to staff. Commit to quote unquote hardcore Twitter or take severance. Here's the summary. Employees were told that they had to sign a pledge to stay on with the company. Quote, this is from the email. If you're sure that you want to be part of the new Twitter, please click yes on the link below. Anyone who did not sign the pledge by 5 p.m. Eastern Time Thursday will receive 3 months severance pay, the message said. In the midnight email, which was obtained by Washington Post, Musk said, we will need to be extremely hardcore. Going forward, this will mean working, this is a quote, this will mean working long hours at high intensity, he said. Only exceptional performance will constitute a passing grade. The pledge email, paired with a new policy mandating a return to the office, is expected to lead to even more attrition at the company whose staff Musk had already reduced by half, right? So he's basically saying, he's sort of getting the company ready to say, look, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to work long hours and sign this pledge saying if you're up for that. And if you're not up for that, that's great. You get 3 months severance. See you later. Because to your point earlier, Margo, like this not being a technical problem, he wants it to be a technical problem. And he has he has identified a technical challenge. In his mind, I think a technical challenge is like this company, is inefficient. Like their infrastructure, though it may work fine and there's no more fail whales, it's, it could be done better. Smarter people could make this better. We can cut our infrastructure costs, save a lot of money. Like it's bloated and overrun. There's a lot of stuff we probably don't need. And the stuff we do need could be more efficient, right? He's decided, because I think that's what appeals to him, that is the technical challenge in front of them. And what he wants is a crack team of people who are willing to sacrifice their own lives, family, mental and physical health, who will never contradict him or say anything mean to him or about him, even when he's entirely wrong, to destroy themselves to help him achieve that goal. And as you pointed out, so all right, so you snap your fingers and you achieve that goal. Have you solved any problem for Twitter? Like, yeah, you probably saved a little bit of money in infrastructure. Hey, let's say you can cut their infrastructure costs in half. Have you found a way to make enough money to service your debt now that all the advertisers are gone because of the other stupid things that you did? Probably not, right? So I don't know why he's identified that as a problem that is super important to tackle. And I think if you are going to tackle that, trying to tell the entire company that you have, you have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. to sign this pledge saying you will destroy yourself for me, otherwise you're fired. I mean, it seems like that's not the best way to staff up for, tackling this problem. And the only thing I can say is like maybe if you had a startup and you're like, look, I'm going to be the worst startup CEO ever. I'm going to destroy everybody who works for me. They're all going to burn out. But the few that don't will get a big payday from an IPO. And by the way, we don't have a product yet, but this crack team is going to build it. But that's not the situation, Trigger. They already got the product. They've already got a big company with a product. They don't have to build it. And it's almost like he wants to destroy it so it becomes nothing and then build it back up from zero with his crack team of burned out sycophants. And I mean, that's one way to go about it, but it's just totally like, destructive to value, destructive to people's lives. And this is the point that Twitter already exists. Like you don't have to build it. It's already there. You just need to learn how to run it in such a way that it makes money and is better in whatever way you decide is better.
You're right. Like he's so over focused on the technical side and the overhead side. And even if he's correct, they were overstaffed before. Maybe not as much as he thinks they were, but they were overstaffed before. And we have heard stories that their technical stack was kind of a mess. However, that's not the hard part about running Twitter. The hard part about running Twitter is all the people issues, all the politics issues, all these like the abuse issues and
policies, incentives, and business models. Those are the actual hard parts, but he's not interested in those. He's interested in, I want to write code because that, I don't know, it seems more fun.
Or at least he's going in there. Look, every 20-year-old, every like smart 20-year-old programmer has left college where they were the smart 20-year-old hotshot, and they go get a job and they look at everything around them and they're like, that's stupid. Why is it done that way? We should just X, right? It's the dumb 20-year-old thing to do. We've all been there. Most of us, myself included, have been that guy. you look at something from an ignorant, inexperienced point of view, and you think, this is a much simpler problem than these other idiots seem to make it out to be. I'm going to waltz in there and make a simple fix. And then you waltz in there and you realize, oh, God, this is way more complicated than I thought it was, or it was done this way for a reason, and you get your butt kicked, effectively.
But what if you didn't have to ever realize that? Because what you could do is simply fire everyone who contradicted you. Like, imagine if the 20-year-old comes into the company, says that, and instead of like learning a hard lesson by trying to rewrite something and, you know, messing up production and getting like a stern talking to and blah, 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 if instead they came in and said that, the people who knew better corrected him, and then the 20-year-old fired them.
Right.
Like, that's the situation we're in. It's like, that's not a path to success.
Again, I want Twitter to succeed. I decreasingly want him to succeed. I think he's such a horrible person right now. Like the way
did say he's going to get someone else to be CEO, which is, I think maybe he's getting tired of people yelling at him. So like someone else can run the company and he can go back to whatever he normally does.
All I can say is like, keep the heat up, everyone. Like keep telling him how much of a piece of crap he is.
Unless you're a Twitter employee, in which case you're going to get fired.
No, and the downside, I mean, God, I my opinion of him is dropping so quickly. Like I've decided I'm selling my Tesla. I don't want it anymore. I don't want him anymore. I'm still going to be on Twitter because I want Twitter to succeed, but God, I wish it wasn't his. And I outlined last week why I want Twitter to succeed. And we'll get to a little bit more of that later. But I want everything bad to happen to him. I want him to be constantly trolled. I want him to not have any peace in his life, because people are constantly telling him how much of an ass and an idiot he is. That's what I want for him, because what he does to people. Because here's the thing, like this email he sent. I mean, this angers me on so many levels. This ultimatum that you have to become, work your butt off extra hours forever or leave. That is such like Silicon Valley toxic workaholism culture, and I take such deep offense to that in our industry. It's a huge problem in our industry, and I've talked about it before. I am so strongly against that workaholism culture because it has so many negative effects. Because the thing is, like, not everyone is some 20-year-old hotshot who wants to sleep at the office and eat pizza like in Silicon Valley, like the TV show. Not everyone is like that, and not everyone can do that. And when you create a workplace where that's the only acceptable culture, not only does it burn out those people who are willing to do that, but it excludes tons of people who can't or won't work that way. And then it creates other things, like, for instance, one of the problems we now have is that as the tech industry is laying off tons of people, we have to deal with H-1B visa holders, where this is the type of visa, for anyone who doesn't know, in the U.S., we offer visas for people who are not U.S. citizens to come here and work using this work visa. And, I don't know the details, forgive me, but the company who you're working for kind of sponsors it in some way. So a lot of people who are going to stay, who are going to keep working for this jerk, are H-1B visa holders who, if they decide not to accept his terms, they have to leave the country. And that's a serious thing. And so there's all these little knock-on effects that when you first think about what he's doing, you might think, oh, well, he just wants really good workers, and only the most dedicated people will stay. Well, it's not that simple. You're going to have all these people who really can't and don't want to work that way, but are kind of forced to for the reasons like this. And it excludes tons of people who can't work that way. What if you have a kid? You shouldn't be at the office working long nights every night if you have a kid. What if you have to take care of somebody at home? Like, there's so many groups of people or situations that you either exclude or abuse with these simplistic views of the world that, oh, you better work here because you want to be hardcore. Like, things are not that simple. Things have never been that simple. And if he would just take his head out of his ass for 2 seconds and look around, he might have a small chance of seeing that. But unfortunately, that's never going to happen.
And that's the thing that bothers me. I'm glad you brought that up. All the Elon fans that I have heard, shouting into the ether, seem to say things like, oh, it's a meritocracy, and oh, the best people will be there and they won't mind, and blah, blah, blah. What if the best person is the person who can only give 8 hours a day to their job? Why is that bad? Or what if the best person doesn't live in San Francisco? Like, why is that bad? It's so backwards, and I don't know. It's when he makes these proclamations, like, okay, boomer, sure. He's only like 5 or 10. He's like 10 years older than me, and like 5 years older than John, I think. But it's such a like boomer mentality of
no. The boomers only work 9 to 5. Like
that's true. Actually, no, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
The premise that people accept, you can even see it in the chat room. Somebody said that this workaholism culture is the reason why Silicon Valley became successful, right?
No, it's not,
and why the employees make so much money.
Also not.
So the premise is that if you do live in the office and, spend all your life there or whatever, that you will somehow do better work than if you didn't do that. And that's absolutely not true. Every time they've ever studied this, I mean, you should know this just as a programmer. Should I pull an all-nighter or should I go to sleep and work on this problem again in the morning? Oh, if I sleep, I'm losing 8 hours of working time. Therefore, I should pull an all-nighter. Your efficiency and quality of programming at, 3 a.m. are detrimental to your productivity. You should go to sleep. Like, making people burn themselves out does not produce better work than letting them be rested. That's what the smart companies know. And the companies that have been successful, like the 8088 was not made by people who are pulling all-nighters for years at a time, right? Crunch in the game industry. Like, does that make better games? No, it makes everything worse and it destroys lives. And even gaming companies are learning if we want to do better, we should try to avoid that, right? It feels like you're doing, like, I'm doing the hard work, and you have to do this, especially if you're going to be in a startup. Never mind that Twitter is not a startup. Anyway, this is what you just have to do for that big payday. You just got to give your all. And it's like your fundamental assumption that working harder and longer hours produces better work is what you need to re-examine. And once you've re-examined that, it's much easier to, setting aside like the humanity of like, don't be cruel to people, especially dumb 20-year-olds who have no life experience. Oh, they can do it because they don't have a family. They have health and they should have lives. It's cruel to essentially not trick them, but coerce them into working harder than they should in a way that they'll regret. They'll say, I spent my 20s burning myself out at this company and I saw no benefit from it, right? And I just wasted my life, right? And they don't know that now, but because they don't have kids and can do it, and they think they will convince themselves that they're doing better work by working longer hours. No. And the bad thing about it, I don't know a lot about Twitter culture, but it seems like from all the people bailing on Twitter that their culture was, let's say, I mean, certainly better than this and possibly better than average in terms of work-life balance and the culture of being able to say things on internal Slacks that are critical of leadership. I mean, people are bragging about that like it's a big deal, but I can't even imagine working at a company where if you say something against leadership in an internal channel or in even an internal meeting or to the face of like a VP in a meeting, like that shouldn't be a fireable offense. Like you can offend people and be rude and, politically get in trouble inside a company, but a company that will not allow dissent from within the company in the privacy of that company is not a healthy company. And so these Twitter employees were accustomed to the environment where they weren't told that you need to work 20 hours a day, where there was an acknowledgement that you have a life, where there was an acknowledgement that you will do better work for the company if you are well rested and have stability in the rest of your life. And there was an acknowledgement within the company that it's okay to criticize the company because that's a healthy thing and that's how we get better. And then overnight, all that changes and people quit on their own, people get fired, people get laid off. I'm wondering how many people will be left. And it's the people who are left are going to be the people who are foolishly willing enough to destroy their lives for the amusement, essentially, not benefit because they didn't need anything, for the amusement of this billionaire. And the people who are trapped, who have H-1B visas or can't get another job quickly or really need this job right now because they're in financial straits or they need the healthcare. Like there are so many reasons in our stupid system, healthcare being tied to your job, one of the big ones, something that people who are saying another country might not think about. When you leave your job, you lose your healthcare unless you're willing to pay a lot of money to continue getting it for some amount of time. It's messed up. Anyway, so I feel like the only people left will be the true believers who are going to destroy themselves for him, and the people who are trapped. And those are not the best people. And then if you drive all those people to work ridiculous hours, you're going to get poor work out of those remaining people. And it's just not a good situation. Like I said last week, if you got enough money, you can just play that game out, burn the thing to the ground, and start building up from the bottom purely with, Elon fans who are willing to destroy themselves for him. I don't think that's a healthy company culture either, but it is a path that he can take as long as he's willing to continue to put billions and billions of dollars into this to pay off the debt and continue to hopefully keep the service running, he's got enough runway to, continue this farce for as long as he wants.
And it isn't just about like, he's going to ruin these people or like in these kind of working conditions, the best people won't even work for you. The best people usually are not the 20-year-olds. It's good to have those 20-year-olds in the company because they do provide a lot of energy, a lot of kind of grunt work. They do have good ideas that the older people might not think of, and a little bit of kind of gumption in certain ways that older people tend to fade off on. But like the older people in the company, and I mean, this is still Silicon Valley. The term older means like people much younger than me. I'm talking people who are like 30. It's really terrible. We have an awful ageism problem in our industry. But people who are older who might have a family and they are refusing to work 16-hour days for this jerk. They are better usually. The experience they have usually makes them more efficient workers, and they know their value, and they know that they can do great work benefiting the company massively, even if they're only there 8 hours a day. And if your company culture or explicit rules makes it so that those kind of people either can't or won't work for you, then you're only ever going to get those either the 20-year-old hotshots or the people who are too stuck and aren't able to leave, and you're going to be missing out on so much of the best talent. So it isn't just like it isn't just that you're going to be being mean to the people you have. It's that you literally won't even be able to get the best people and even if he's done everything right up to this point, which of course he so much hasn't, but the best people won't even work for you. And so you have to then hire more of those hotshot 20-year-olds, and you still won't get the quality and efficiency of work that you get from more experienced people being present in the ranks. And so it ends up being even less efficient, and you have to work people even harder because you're working less efficiently or doing things that are less wise. And it's such a huge mess. And it all comes down to, wow, for a guy who's run so many companies, he really seems terrible at running companies.
Right. That's the thing. All right, we got to move on. Semi-real-time follow-up from Hey You DVD in the chat with regard to the Apple TV 4K. First gen, A10X, old Siri remote that everyone hated. Second gen, A12, new remote. Third gen, A15, USB-C remote. That's your 3 generations.
However, if you bought a new remote for an older Apple TV...
Which I did.
I did too. Then it's all out the window. We are brought to you this week by Trade Coffee. The holidays are approaching. It's kind of shopping season, and we all have the people in our life who are more difficult to shop for, let's say. And if you're looking for something to get even the most difficult person to shop for, consider a personalized coffee subscription from Trade Coffee. This is a coffee subscription service that makes it super simple to discover new coffees and make your best cup of coffee at home every day. Trade partners with the nation's top-rated independent roasters to send you coffee that they know you'll love, fresh to your home, and on whatever schedule you want it. So whether you already know what you like or you're new to specialty coffee, you need some help, Trade makes it easy and convenient to discover new coffees. I personally have used Trade for, I think, over a year now. What I love about it is that they have such a variety. It's incredible. And fresh roasted coffee, which is what you get from Trade, is by far the best way to make coffee at home. Like, you don't need like a fancy brewer or some fancy brand name or whatever. You need fresh roasted coffee. That's what comes in the mail every week for me with Trade, and it is glorious because I told them what I like, certain roast levels, certain flavor profiles, even certain origins. I tell them how I'm brewing it, and they send me new stuff. I don't have to think about it. It's great. I can thumb it up if I want to have more like this or something. But honestly, I don't really give them much input. I just keep drinking it because it's just good. I don't even have to think about it. It's wonderful. It's not only great for you, it's great as a gift. So see for yourself. It is great. So treat yourself or the coffee lover in your life with Trade Coffee. Right now, Trade is offering our listeners a total of $30 off a subscription and access to limited time holiday specials at drinktrade.com/ATP. That's drinktrade.com/ATP for $30 off. drinktrade.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Trade Coffee for keeping me caffeinated and sponsoring our show.
All right, with regard to the utility of HomeKit, this is from Todd. Todd writes, I'm a high-level quadriplegic, which means I have no use of my arms or legs. I have been doing home automation for 30 years. HomeKit has been a blessing. It's fairly simple to set up, and it is very reliable. I'm not so sure if that's true, but hey, if Todd thinks it's reliable, I'm good with that. Not so much for consumer-level home automation that came before it. I have iDevice switches all over the place. It's so enabling to be able to tell Siri to turn lights on and off. I have outside lights automated to come on and turn off. It's great. For me, there's a lot of return on investment with HomeKit automation. I think that's a really good call, and it's not just people without use of their arms and legs. I can think of many different kinds of people that being able to shout into the ether and have a response could be really powerful. So I thought that was a good point from Todd.
Yeah, another advantage of when big consumer electronic companies enter an area that was previously like specialized, like what he described as consumer level home automation that came before it. Like when it was a smaller industry and the only people, it's like, well, most people just have light switches. But if you really need something, there's these 3 companies that try to make things for people who can't reach light switches or whatever, right? But having a big company like Apple come in has got to be just, so much more money and effort put into making it better. So we may all complain about HomeKit, but it's probably because that's the only home automation thing we've ever dealt with. If we had to deal with like cruddy home automation, from the 80s or 90s or something that came before this, I'm sure that was much worse.
Indeed. I remember when I was growing up, my dad had, what was it, X10, something like that? I forget what it was now.
Yeah, the banner ads in the web, yeah.
Yep, he had X10 all over the place. Then I put in a very, very small X10 installation in my dorm room because I was that kind of a dork. I think I told this story at one point on the show. But anyways, his X10 setup was really robust and worked reasonably well, much to my surprise. I think it was X10. I might have that wrong. But
Didn't they invent the pop under or the pop up? Was that them?
I have no idea.
Yeah, great legacy, guys.
Yeah, well, there's that. I don't know. It was cool stuff, and that he had to like have a dedicated Windows machine to be like the server for it. It was a mess, but it was cool that he was doing this in the mid-90s. Hey, the Mac is entering its 3rd year of the quote 2-year transition quote to Apple Silicon. This was pointed out by Cult of Mac, where we are in the beginning of the 3rd year, and we were supposed to have it all done in 2 years.
And that's counting generously because they announced in June, like the first ARM Macs, and they basically said, we'll begin our 2-year transition when like the first one comes out at the end of the year. So here we are at the end of 2022, which is generously 2 years after not the announcement of ARM Macs, but when the first one came out. So yeah, entering year 3 of the 2-year transition, still waiting for that Mac Pro.
Yeah, so with regard to that, we got one of the best feedback emails that I've received in a while. And this is from Jonathan Clayton, who writes, because the quote-unquote new Mac Pro was a topic of discussion yet again, and to validate Casey's anger about discussing the topic, I did some back-of-the-envelope math. ATP went live, as Jonathan wrote this, 3,564 days ago as of November 11th, 2022. For 2,641 days, or 74% of its existence, there's been anticipation about whatever has come to define the new Mac Pro. For 257 days was the ATP launch until the 2013 Mac Pro shipped. For 1,512 days was the 2 years after the 2013 Mac Pro was released, about the time when people started asking questions, until the Mac Pro 2019 shipped, and then 872 days and counting since Apple announced Apple Silicon transition at WWDC 2020, and the 2019 Mac Pro was doomed. Sorry, John. So there have only been, according to Jonathan, 923 days in ATP's existence of 3,564 days, where everyone was okay with the current state of the Mac Pro. So 25% of ATP's nearly 10 years that the two of you have been, well, really me too, but all 3 of us have been satisfied. And I just thought that was wonderful, delightful back-the-envelope math to share with everyone.
So it's interesting math, but I don't agree with the part where it says these numbers indicate times when we were or weren't satisfied with the existence of the Mac Pro. For instance, right now, I'm perfectly satisfied with my Mac Pro. I don't think like, Apple needs to do something with the Mac Pro. The current Mac Pro is great. It's just what I wanted. So you can't basically start counting as soon as they release one and say, well, now you're immediately dissatisfied and waiting for the next one. Sometimes we were waiting for the next one, almost the entire reign of the trash can was kind of like, yeah, we're kind of dissatisfied, right? But for the entire reign of the 2019 Mac Pro, I certainly haven't been dissatisfied. I'm not here saying, when are they? I'm interested in the new Mac Pro, but I'm not dissatisfied with the state of it. I'm not saying, when is Apple going to make a real Mac Pro? They made one. I bought it. I've got it. I'm happy. I thanks for all the math, but I think if you're going to do sentiment analysis of when we're upset about the Mac Pro, I think you would find much longer spans when we were upset, for instance, about the laptops.
That is fair. That is fair.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
But the difference is that was completely justified. Whereas I don't know if all that Mac Pro whining was, but that's okay.
Just wait. When they come out with the new Mac Pro, and if it's like another trash can type thing where it's not satisfactory, then we'll enter another dark period. But we'll see.
I'm so very excited. All right. So something that I'm actually genuinely excited about is the iPhone's 14 satellite emergency SOS is live if you live in the U.S. and I think only the U.S. This debuted, I think, Monday or maybe yesterday. It was sometime in the last 48 hours. And we'll put a link to the Apple Newsroom article where they mention that France, Germany, Ireland, and the UK are coming next month in December. And I also thought it was interesting. They kind of made passing mention of this, but I don't think they ever really discussed how or the mechanism for it. But in the Newsroom article, they said, additionally, if users want to reassure friends or family of their whereabouts while traveling off the grid, they can now open the Find My app and share their location via satellite. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Another thing that I thought was super cool, no sarcasm, is that you can actually do a demo on your iPhone 14. So if you have an iPhone 14, you can go into settings and then emergency SOS is one of the top level settings, and then go down to try demo. And you can actually try out a faked, oh my gosh, I'm having an emergency situation, and it's completely faked.
Is it completely fake? So here's two things. One, I found out about this thing, and my very first thought was, oh, it's kind of a shame I don't have an emergency because it would be cool to try that. And then
exactly.
2 seconds later, I found out, hey, Apple thought of that, and they made a way, because they know people want to try it. So they made a way for you to try it without actually having emergency, which I think is great. Second, how much of it is faked? Because I tried it.
True.
And it makes you do like, point towards the satellite and line up the thing or whatever. And then obviously it doesn't send the message, right? That part is surely fake. But is the part where you're trying to find the satellite also fake? Because you could fool me, like just pick an arbitrary point direction and then make me move my phone. Because it's not sending anything. There's no way for me to tell. Is the part where you're turning around to find the satellite real? Because it does tell you to go outside, and I went outside. I should have tried it from like inside underneath a piece of tinfoil to see if if it still says, oh, you found the satellite, But either way, it's fun to do the demo. You should try it. It brings you through a bunch of things. But almost all of it is fake. But what I really hope is the part where you pointed at the satellite and it at the very least receives whatever the satellite is spraying down. I hope that part's real. I want to believe it's real.
Oh, same. And I assumed that part was real. Although then as I was talking about it during the show, I was thinking, well, maybe that wasn't real at all. But I assumed the satellite connectivity part was real. It's just the emergency part, just like you said a moment ago, the emergency part was not. But you make a good point, and it occurred to me, like I said while I was talking about it, that maybe everything was fake. I don't know. We'll have to maybe follow up.
Yeah, and also when you're doing this demo, like they put this is right. So the fact this feature exists, I think, is great. This is like Apple at its best, anticipating what people want to do, and then they just they did a good job of making this fake UI, because it's not an easy task to make it clear that you're doing something that's fake, to make sure you can't accidentally do the non-fake thing, and on every single screen making it so that there's no confusion about the fact, don't worry, you're not actually telling ambulances to come to your house. Difficult problem they did not have to tackle just for this purely hey, people want to try this because it's fun. And it's not just fun, it's also rehearsal for if you ever have an emergency, because the last thing you want to be doing in an emergency is I know my phone's supposed to do this thing, but I've literally never done it and I have no idea where it is, which is why one of the cool features of this is you don't have to remember where it is. Just in America, dial 911. And if it can't dial 9, that's all you have to remember. That's what people know anyway. Oh, something terrible has happened, dial 911. If you're in the mountains and have no signal, right on the screen where you dial 911, it will throw up a button that says, satellite, do this, SOS, whatever, because it will try 911, but if there's no phone available, so you don't have to learn I have to go into settings or what app is this under or whatever. If you just do the first thing that comes to your mind, which is to dial the emergency number, you will be presented with an option to do this if necessary.
Yeah, that's really cool, because that's when I first saw that there was a demo, I was like, what? That's so unlike Apple to offer that kind of thing. So it's noteworthy, first of all, that it's there. And then I started thinking, why is it there? And at first I thought, well, it's probably there just for the PR of this new software release. Of now everyone can try it out and see. But then I thought, really, that kind of rehearsal angle of they want people to know where this is for when you need it. That's really cool. And again, all this is very un-Apple-like, but I think in a very good way.
I think it is Apple-like. Like, maybe it's because I'm old, but this is exactly what I think of when I think of Apple is someone being really thoughtful about a feature and then spending way too much time and effort to make a really good UI for the fake satellite interface. So because the challenge is there is to teach people how it's going to work. If you were an emergency, here's what we would be asking you to do. We'd be asking you to find satellites. We'd be this is what you're going to do. So it's a rehearsal, but also the whole time, make sure that you're not doing anything destructive and it's clear to you that it's a demo. And that's a lot of work. And that's the best of the Apple that I think of. Maybe it's the 80s or 90s Apple, but the Apple that was all about user experience and user interface and surprise and delight and, not ads.
Yeah.
If only.
You have to click through this ad before you can send the satellite message.
Yeah. Hey, it looks like you're trying to dial 911. Can I interest you in a casino app?
Right. You might want to sign up for Apple Arcade before you send that message. Are you sure?
It's going to take you a really long time before the helicopter gets there. You might want to kill some time with this new gambling slots app.
Mm-hmm. All right, focus, gentlemen. So I did this, demo just like the two of you did, and I did a screen recording while I was doing it, and I tweeted it. Because as we sit here now, Twitter's still here miraculously. And so we'll put a link to that video in the show notes. I'm sure the quality is garbage, but nevertheless, it'll give you the gist of it if you don't have an iPhone 14. But yeah, I thought it was really, really cool. I love that this is something you can try. And just like the two of you said, it is a great rehearsal for when the time comes. So all good things. Then the same day, iJustine on YouTube was given a special privilege to discuss all this with Cayenne Drance and Arun and Tim something or other. I'm sorry, I forgot to write the rest of the names down. But anyways, they talked about a bunch of things. They mentioned on this, and perhaps in the newsroom as well, that it is free for 2 years, quote, starting with the activation of your iPhone 14, quote. And they made some other interesting kind of one-off comments. They said that the satellites are traveling at 15,000 miles an hour, 800 miles above the Earth. Leaving aside the 15,000 miles an hour thing, I still think to this day that it is pretty freaking cool that this little brick in my hand can talk to a cell tower that's, maybe a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles away. We're talking about a satellite 800 miles above the Earth. That is extremely cool. I hope to never need this feature, but I just think that's super duper cool that this is something that we have in like a run-of-the-mill everyday phone. I think that's awesome. It was also interesting that Arun said that if you're in a car accident, the phone will try to dial 911, but if it can't, it will, and these are direct quotes now, if it's unable to call 911, it will then use this capability to try to get the message out via satellite. In that situation, the phone probably does not have a clear view of the sky and might be between the seats or in the trunk. So we keep the data extremely small in that situation, and we have a really good confidence that we'll still be able to get that message out and get you home. How freaking cool is that? That it knows if you're in a car accident, like God forbid, that we've got to keep this, whatever the transmission is, crazy small because we may not have a long time to transmit it. So I thought that was super neat.
If you're in a car accident or you're on a roller coaster, remember we didn't cover that. We didn't cover that story where people were getting activations on amusement park rides. And I feel for Apple there because I don't think that's malfunctioning. I think a lot of the motions that happen to you when you're on an amusement park ride are exactly the same as happen when you're in a car accident, especially when you're considering its motion happening to the phone, not necessarily to you. So I'm not saying amusement park rides injure you, but it could be that in an actual car accident that injures you, your phone may experience exactly the same accelerations of exactly the same kind as it would in an amusement park ride if it was in your pocket. So I don't know how you solve that problem, really. And then, the worst case scenario, you're in an accident in an amusement park ride. Right? So it's not like they're, maybe they could help with their ML model or whatever, but I feel like it's not doing anything wrong. Like in many cases, there is no difference. And so I'm not quite sure how they solve that problem, but it seems like it might be an actual problem. Maybe they'll have signs at amusement parks that say, put your phone into airplane mode or don't bring your phone on this ride with you or something like that. And in general, I would say don't bring your phone on a roller coaster. You don't need to text anybody while you're on it. I remember last time was it Great American? No, I think it was Universal maybe in Florida, waiting for my family to get off a ride. And it was like some looping roller coaster that went over the water, and I'm standing by the railing looking at the water, and down at the bottom of the water, you could just see the lit up screens of a bunch of phones. Because there's people who were going over the loops, and they're like falling out of their purse, falling out of their pocket. Don't bring your phone on the ride.
Okay, well, what else are you supposed to do with it? If it's in your pocket.
They have lockers. They have lockers that you can put your stuff.
They cost like $1,000 a minute.
It's an amusement park.
I know, but like, would you rather your phone be lit up at the bottom? It must have been, since they were unlocked. It must have been people like trying to take a video while they're on the roller coaster or something like that, and there they are in the water. Good job.
Anyway, real-time follow-up. I have no idea if this is 100% true or not, but according to 100 Ghosts in the chat, I had a message that said the satellite had passed and I would need to wait 2 minutes for the next one to be available. This is in the context of doing the demo. So that makes me think it's what you and I expected, John, that the satellite portion was real.
You can fake that part too. Have you ever played a video game?
Oh, well, but why would they do that? It makes the service look worse.
They want to give you an authentic experience of what it's really going to be like. I just don't actually know if, any actual communication with the satellite is involved. Not that it really matters. Like the whole point of the rehearsal is this is what you're going to be asked to do. Maybe it'll say it passed. You're going to have to point in a direction. You're going to have to hold it there. Like they can make the rehearsal be authentic.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, moving along, it is worth noting that in order to do this in order to send your location, you can do that manually. It doesn't happen automatically, but you can manually go into the Find My app. And you could do this right now, but it won't let you send it. Find me, and then my location via satellite. And presumably, I didn't try this, but presumably this is where you would say, okay, who do you want to send it to? But it says, generally speaking, not available. And then there's a learn more and a chevron. And in the learn more, it says something along the lines of, hey, you're connected to cell and or Wi-Fi, so we're not going to bother with the satellite right now. But which I thought was reasonable. A couple other things from the iJustine interview. The medical ID is sent along with the SOS message. So, what you're allergic to, how big, how tall you are, how much you weigh, et cetera, which I thought was interesting. Again, going back to Arun, this is a quote. It was really important to use the satellite constellation that was fully mature and built out. The challenge became, how do we make the iPhone be able to interact with this thing that's already launched and been up there for a long time and has been mature? So we had to make the necessary hardware modifications to allow us to optimize that communication back and forth, and then build an entirely new communication stack that included a whole new waveform and all the layers above, a custom link layer, a custom networking layer, etc. And they eventually came out and stated that Global Star is the partner company. And they said that was in no small part because apparently it is unusual for satellite radio operators to have a single global frequency, but Global Star does. So whatever it is, 123.5 megahertz or whatever, that is the case across the planet. And Mike had said that they have Apple proprietary radio systems in each of Global Star's ground stations to support this. He also said in summary, we have a general idea of the dead zones from cellular networks. He said, I'm paraphrasing what he said, that they have a general idea of where the dead zones are from cellular networks. And when they were building this all out and figuring out how to make it work, they were prioritizing, how do we make these areas work? So like, I don't know, the Shenandoah National Park here in the East Coast or one of the 8 gazillion parks in California, they know these are the places that people are going to use this sort of thing. How do we make it work the best there? I found all of this extremely fascinating. I think the Justine video, which is about 20 minutes long, is worth your time. I just think it's super cool. All right, moving right along. Mastodon. Is that a thing? Are we doing this?
It seems to possibly be becoming a thing.
I had to look this up because, all right, so we'll talk about what Mastodon in a second, but it'll explain why I have lots of accounts in them. But my accounts, I signed up for them 5 years ago, probably during the last Twitter is doomed cycle, right? I mean, we all went to app.net at one point and, not went to, but got signed up for app.net. And at some point, apparently in 2017, I signed up for tons of Mastodon stuff. So when the Mastodon stuff came around, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I have a Mastodon account. Turns out I had like 6 Mastodon accounts, which is part of the problem. Anyway, continue. What is Mastodon?
Right. So I don't know if I'm the best person to give a great summary of Mastodon, but the idea of Mastodon is, what if you had Twitter, but it wasn't as centralized? It was kind of quasi-centralized. And so you could join an instance. What is there? Is instance the term they use for it? What do they call it?
Yeah, instance.
Okay. You can join an instance, which is basically a server, where there are like-minded individuals. And that, in theory.
You can join an instance.
You can,
it's federated. You can join an instance.
No, hear me out for a second. I think the theory, in my understanding anyway of the theory, is that you join a server, an instance that has like-minded individuals, and then the administrators of that instance can block other instances from talking to you. They can do all sorts of content moderation and so on and so forth. So if you want to be, in a instance where free speech is a thing, you can do that. If you want to be in an instance where you mostly chat about programming stuff, you can do that. But what's fascinating and interesting about Mastodon is that, like you said, it's federated. So what that basically means is you can link up and follow other accounts from other instances. So even though I might be on mastodon.social, which I have an account there, but I haven't posted anything, I might be on mastodon.social, but John might be in ItalianAmericans.family or something like that.
John might be in 7 other.
And 7 other ones too. So in theory, I think that's a kind of neat idea. But in practice, I think it's kind of aesthetically icky. And I just don't know how well it really works out, especially since you can, as the instance owner / runner / whatever, you can just up and decide, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And that has happened. And I think the code of conduct or whatever amongst Mastodon administrators is you have to give like 6 months notice or something like that. But really, you don't, I don't think. Like, what are they going to do?
Well, let me describe some more of the cool features about this, because and get to the kicker, which is like last week or maybe the week before, Marco was like, look, we're not going to go to Mastodon, and even if we did, it doesn't matter because they're going to have all the same problems as Twitter. A lot of people said, wait, but have you heard about Mastodon's features? Like, they're not going to have all the same problems as Twitter because it has all these features. You already talked about one, Casey. Oh, if you're on a server, that server can decide which ones it wants to federate with. It can just block an entire server filled with trolls, right? And so you don't have to deal with them and blah, blah, blah. And there's even more to it than that. If an instance shuts down, you can transfer basically your followers or your identity, like redirect to a different thing. So it's not like, oh, I'm beholden to the owner of this thing, so if they shut it down, then I'm screwed and I lose everything. No, there's actually a feature where you can transfer your followers and your account and your identity to another instance, right? And so it's made to be sort of resilient, decentralized, giving each instance owner the ability to form a community that works, the way they want it to work. But I think having said all of that, and I'm sure there's other features that I'm even missing about this, having said all of that, like, ActivityPub, the public API for this type of thing and everything, you do still have all the same problems as Twitter. You just have them in miniature form, repeated many different times. What are the problems of Twitter? The problems of Twitter are, how do we set the rules for this community? How do we decide what behavior is and isn't allowed? How do we decide which other federated instances to block and to not block? How do we decide when to kick somebody off? How do we make money to keep this service running? Does making that money make it an unpleasant place for people to be, right? It's all exactly the same problems as Twitter. The good thing about it is that you get many, many chances to solve those. So instead of just having one chance with one stupid Elon Musk running the thing or whatever, you get 50 chances. But that's also the bad thing, and it's why I have so many accounts. I want to sign up for Mastodon. Which instance should I choose? The instance where other people I know are?
Oh, maybe. But that doesn't matter.
But yeah, well, it kind of matters because you can have a local feed. But like, if an instance is like, oh, it's the place, there's a community with a set of rules, I want to go where my friends are because I bet that set of rules is good. Well, but it also could just be that all your friends went to the most popular instance, and it turns out the most popular instance is run by a megalomaniac who reads all your DMs because, by the way, the owner of the instance can read all your stuff, right? It's like, you don't know that, right? So maybe that's the wrong instance. Maybe I should go to this instance. Oh, that instance was run by somebody as a hobby, and they shut it down 2 years ago, right? When I went in to re-sign into my Mastodon things, one of them was totally gone because the thing was shut down. One of them had a big red banner at the top said, warning, this thing is shutting down imminently. One of them I forgot my password to forever, so that one's gone, right? I don't know why it wasn't in any of my keychains or something, or maybe I just never knew the password and didn't save it. And the quote-unquote popular one, mastodon.social, I couldn't get my username on, which frustrates me to no end, right? And then I have like 3 other ones, right? And so I'm shuffling the people. But anyway, it is better than Twitter because it is less centralized, but all that means is that that all these instances now have this trial by fire of, hey, You think it's so easy to run Twitter? You figure out how to do it and figure out how to do it. Figure out how to keep the lights on. Figure out how to make enough money to run the instance. If your thing becomes popular and you're not making any money, how much you think it's going to cost you to run Mastodon for all of these people and do all the federated activity? And then, by the way, if a bunch of Nazis come into your server, you're going to spend your whole day fighting them off, and then spam bots come, and then blah, blah, blah. It's like, if you become like the most successful big instance, Mastodon.social, it's super popular. It's got millions of people. Well, that's like, days or weeks away from like facing the same problems that Twitter faced when it got, a million or so people. All right. So I'm not poo-pooing these things. I think it is better than having one publicly or privately held company that is the centralized version of all of this. But I think I'm not going to say, it's not going to help and it's not going to save us, because if Twitter goes away, Mastodon is better than nothing, I feel like, and it is very much Twitter-like. But boy, they have an uphill climb. They're going to have to go through all the same thing. Their instances are going to come and go. They're going to have to work through all sorts of different rules. Hopefully there'll be enough of them trying these experiments, but there'll be a lot of wreckage from that of like, this server screwed up and this was invaded by Nazis and they set these rules here and this one doesn't allow cursing. And, there's just going to be a lot of that churn going on, and it's just exhausting to keep up with that. So that's probably going to keep it from ever being popular with anybody except for real nerdy people. And then all the years of stuff that's happened on Twitter, the API, all the clients that are built around. I know everyone just uses the official client, but like you can make third-party Mastodon clients probably, but right now there's the official client and the web UI, and they're better than Twitter was in the beginning, but they're not as good as the best of the best Twitter interfaces that exist today. How could they be? They just haven't had time and money to mature. So, it's not that I'm pessimistic about Mastodon, but I just don't. The only problem Mastodon solves is Elon Musk, and it's granted that's a big problem. Or if previously the only problem it solves is Twitter's fairly inept management, right? But all the other problems are there. They're just now spread into little miniature instances of those problems, and then people are sprinkled over those instances like, fend for yourselves, figure it out, hope you land on something with a good moderator, don't say anything in DMs that you don't want anybody to see. And it's, I don't know. I don't relish it. I'm on all sorts of Mastodon things. I still do want to get my last name at Mastodon.social, but I'm working on it.
So on Mastodon.social, they have an about page, which I don't know if you can see it if you're not logged in, but it's Mastodon.social/about. There's a section moderated servers, and there's a list of just eyeballing it, maybe a couple hundred, maybe 10 or 20 of which are limited. And then there's a bunch that are considered suspended. As I'm scrolling this list, one of the servers that are instances that is limited is, I kid you not, poster.club. And FYI, it's limited because of harassment. You don't say. Also, is Elon the president of the poster club? Because he certainly thinks he is.
Yeah, having instances, that is the one good thing about Mastodon is these tiny tyrants who run the instances are able to do what big companies thus far have not been doing, which is like, hey, if someone's being a jerk in your instance, just boot them out. You don't have to have this complicated policy. There's not going to be any New York Times story about how you booted out the jerks. It's like having an IRC server back in the day, like, or whatever, like BBS. Like, if you run the BBS and someone's a jerk, you boot them off, and there's no big story about it, right? Because it's your thing, and you get to run it, and you get to set the rules, right? But what that means is that every instance is at the whim of the, people who own that instance. And how well do you know the people who own instances? Right now, there isn't enough knowledge for like the general public of like, is this a good instance to be on or a bad one? It's like, well, you'll find out. Again, just like BBSs or IRC servers, you'll find out if the admin is a jerk or not eventually. If this ball keeps rolling, there should eventually be public knowledge about which ones are reasonably, safe, nice places to be. But like I said, all of that does is fast forward you to like Twitter circa 2007 or 8 or 9, I guess, where it's like, okay, now we found a nice, pleasant place to be. And now here come all the problems that Twitter encountered. How are you going to deal with them, person who runs this thing in your spare time? Good luck.
Yeah, I don't know. I really feel like I'm turning into old man who shouts at clouds because I don't want to be pessimistic about everything, but I just don't love what I've seen so far on Mastodon. Like I think it seems like Linux, right? I'm sorry, but it's like the
Linux is way better.
Well, fair. It's like the crummy open source version of something that everyone likes, right? Which is impressive.
It's not that crummy. It's actually, I mean, again, considering I signed up for it 5 years ago, it's pretty feature rich, and the web UI does not look like it was just thrown together in a weekend, right? It's not great, and it's overly confusing and overly complicated, and could be improved or whatever. But like, I'm impressed with how many features it's gotten in the 5 years that I've been ignoring it, right? And I get what you're getting at, and that it's like, again, it's a piece of open source software. I mean, the worst thing you say about it is that they're all kind of running the same software. So, whoever modifies that software and updates it has the ability to make our lives better or worse. And how does that work? But, for people thinking it's going to be like, an IRC type thing, it is more pleasant than that.
It is. It is for sure.
Yes. I mean, to me, like the problem with Mastodon is not anything about its features. Suppose you get over all the hurdles. Suppose you choose a server instance or whatever to host yourself, which will host you for some reason indefinitely into the future without problems. Lol. Okay. So suppose you get past that, and suppose that some of your friends get past it too, and they somehow find you or create accounts or whatever. It's just really hard to juggle two very similar social networks where you don't have the same friends on both. You don't have any good way to get all of the friends on one onto the other. And it's kind of hard to know, like, well, what do I post where? Now, if you have, say, topic-specific Mastodon instances, like I was on one for Overcast. There was like a podcast kind of standardized discussion kind of thing, but that was like topic-specific. For just like general use, what do I do with two Twitter-like services? My entire usage pattern of Twitter is through these apps. I have Tweetbot on the Mac. I have Tweetbot on the phone. There's other apps like Twitterific that are great. Mastodon has an app, and I used it briefly on my phone last night. I'm not aware of a Mac app besides the web app, and the web app, and web apps for this kind of stuff just suck compared to native apps. The native apps are way better. And so like on my phone, I tried the Mastodon app, and it because it kind of looks like Twitter and kind of works like Twitter, you expect it to work like Twitter, and it's a bit uncanny valley-ish, and then when you go to do something that works in your Twitter app of choice, and it doesn't work at all, or the same way in Mastodon, it just kind of feels broken. And I can post stuff there, but do I post the same thing? Do I cross-post? Do I have to look at responses from both? Like, in the ideal case, what would get this off the ground is like one app, say Tweetbot or Twitterific, where you could attach your Twitter account and a Mastodon account or two, and view all the replies in one app, and have everything work the same way.
Can you imagine if it had like this? I don't know. What if your timeline was like all together? If it was like, I don't know, what if it was unified? I bet that would be cool.
You're making a joke, but like that, like the inability to browse Mastodon with a unified timeline is actually a barrier for adoption for me personally, because this is what Mark was saying. Like, if you're used to doing it a certain way in Twitter, since this is so similar, there are habits that you're formed. You're like, well, I don't want to use Mastodon. It doesn't let me view it the way I'm used to viewing it. And obviously the solution is that, well, if Twitter implodes, Mastodon starts looking a lot better, and you don't have to have this question anymore, because it is so Twitter-like, and it is the most Twitter-like of the competing things, that if Twitter literally does implode or actually goes down and they can't bring it back up, or whatever, turns into something terrible that everybody leaves, Mastodon is there waiting for it. But like, I feel like the centralization of Twitter, people can sign up for it. They know where to go. They go to twitter.com, right? The single unified namespace, and you could say, well, Mastodon has a unified namespace too. It just has an extra ad and an address in it, just like an email address. Not a big deal. I think it is a big deal, especially since when instances go down, you might not necessarily be able to get the same username elsewhere. Stable URLs. Tweets for all these years have had stable URLs. Not so with Mastodon things, because if that instance goes down and disappears from the web, that URL that points to that instance is not going to work anymore, right? It's kind of why I like this Jack Dorsey, wankery project, whatever, the Project Blue Sky thing, which is like, let's build Twitter, but let's do it with open standards and decentralized and blah, blah, blah. If you look at the technology and ideas behind Project Blue Sky, we'll put a link in the show notes. It's blueskyweb.xyz. The technology and the ideas, I think, are really good. I don't think it will ever actually come to anything, which is the problem. But like, what you want is the best of both worlds. You want the clarity and single unified namespace and stable URLs of Twitter, but without it being owned and controlled by a single private company. And that is a tall order. We kind of already have that with blogs and RSS. It was straightforward. URLs were stable as they wanted to be. You presumably owned and controlled your own blog, and if your hosting company went down, you could move your blog elsewhere or whatever. But that was like a ideal world for computer nerds who know how to make and run and want to make and run their own blog, right? And what that rapidly turned into is, oh, my blog is on Blogger, and then eventually Blogger falls out of favor. Or I'm on LiveJournal, I'm on Tumblr, and it's just like these big companies that were helping other people do this thing that only nerds could do before. And Twitter just solved that problem for everybody. We're one company, go to one place, we're all talk together in one big giant thing. And that's why Marco said it 2 shows ago, it would be ideal if that could just continue in terms of the simplicity of the user experience, but not ideal in terms of the consequences, because as we've seen, the person who controls Twitter can really screw things up for a lot of people. And both pre-Elon and post-Elon, we saw that amply demonstrated, right? So I'm not sure what the solution is, but the blue sky stuff looks really appealing to me if something like that could ever actually be created and gotten off the ground. And if they worked out all the problems of like, how do I make it simple for regular people to sign up while still not having it eventually be owned and controlled by a single company? Because kind of like blogging, you're like, oh, blogging, it's free. It's not owned and controlled by a single company. But once you get the regular people in there who don't want to write their own servers or run their own servers or their own CMSs, you get necessarily these companies that, I don't know if Ben Thompson will call them aggregators, but like, hey, we're a big company. You don't want to have to worry about running a blog. We'll run it for you. That's why I feel like, arguably frequent sponsor Squarespace, encouraging you to get your own domain name kind of helps as a hedge against that, because in theory, if Squarespace goes away or becomes evil or starts charging you too much money, you can just pick up your website because it's at your own domain name and put it someplace else. But now we're back to techie stuff again, right? And what you'd be looking for is another company like Squarespace that solves this problem for you. And that's why you get these big consolidations of a giant company where most people have their Twitter replacement blue sky thing, and then the nerds have their own individual Twitter replacement. Same thing with Mastodon. You can run your Mastodon instance. You can get a Mastodon address that is a domain that you control, but that is definitely a tech nerdy thing, and most people won't do that. So hard problems to solve. Arguably, running Twitter not like an idiot is an easier problem to solve than everything we've discussed here, because Twitter had improved over the years, learned some hard lessons, and was on a path that was ever so slowly getting slightly better over time. If someone could have just taken over Twitter and bent that line up to get better faster, boy, that would have been, much better than where we are now, which is bending that line way, way downward real fast.
Yeah, I don't see Mastodon itself, and maybe it's possible for something else to have a better story here. I don't see Mastodon having the user experience to really ever get mass traction. And part of it is because, of the weird Federation stuff, and then the weird double @ usernames and everything. There's a whole bunch there that's just very, normal person hostile. But
the instability of addresses and URLs, it's a real problem.
But I think ultimately, it's not going to. What's going to take off, if anything, to replace Twitter is going to be another centralized company that's going to have a really nice app and be accessible everywhere and be really easy for everyone to get into, and that's what's going to work. And Mastodon, while I respect what they're trying to do and I like a lot of the ideals behind it, the implementation and the user experience so far is just so regular person hostile, and I don't see that meaningfully changing. What might happen is one Mastodon host might get really popular, and then you just have a different centralized company. That might happen. But the whole thing with like, oh well, you can follow me over here. It's like yeah, like you can make your own moonshine in your bathtub, but like no one's going to really do that. It's this whole nerd dream where everyone's going to have their own domains and their own URLs, and over and over again, the industry just proves that's not what people ever want to do. And at least a lot of people, we can get nerds like us and business owners and stuff to do it, but like to get most of the public into something like this, it has to be way simpler and way easier. There can't be 16 different answers. There can't be a question that poses 16 different options of like, all right, well, first, before you even use this thing, where do you want to make your account? Like that you can't even ask people that. It shouldn't be a question. you should instantly start up with like, we have an amazing app that works really well and that does everything you want it to do. Like that's like table stakes for a social network. You have to have apps on every major platform that have to be great, and they have to be usable, and they have to have features people want. And here's the thing, if you're going to mimic Twitter in what your product is, you have to support a lot of things that Twitter supports, and they have to work the same way. If you're going to make something that looks like Twitter and kind of acts like Twitter, but then doesn't work like Twitter, you're going to anger everybody. Like I was trying to read a thread. Like somebody, I was poking around Mastodon in the app, and somebody posted a thread with a little thread emoji to indicate this is a thread. And for the life of me, I could not figure out how to see the replies to that thread. I tried tapping into that one message or swiping right or whatever, and I got it to show me other replies, but nowhere in the list was like the next post in that thread. and again, it was just some little difference that like this is a small behavioral paper cut that if I'm going to move from Twitter, I can't be hitting paper cuts like that because I am going to expect this thing to work like Twitter. Now, if it's not going to work like Twitter, it should be even more different. I don't get that feeling on Tumblr because Tumblr is way more different from Twitter than Mastodon is. And so Tumblr is its own thing. And so I can go to Tumblr, and while it is very different from Twitter, it doesn't frustrate me in the same way because it's its own thing. It's not trying to be Twitter. Whereas Mastodon is basically trying to be Twitter, and so it has to copy it really well and have all those features nailed down, all those little details nailed down. And Twitter looks like a simple product, but it's not. And that's a hard thing to totally match. And I think at this point, anything that's different from Twitter, Mastodon's been around long enough that it's probably a choice, not a just we haven't gotten to it yet kind of thing. And so that's going to hurt them. And that's going to hurt them with adoption for new people who are in there now kicking the tires because we're all super mad at Elon. Like, they have a big rush of people checking it out right now, but I don't see how that sticks for so many reasons. So I don't know. I hope I'm wrong.
They had a big rush of people 5 years ago when I signed up, too. I mean, I think there's been multiple rushes on Mastodon over the course of time. Like, one way around that is you could be better, right? You could be different, but if you're different, you have to be better enough so that people are willing to learn your new thing and accept the betterness of it because there is advantage to learning the new thing. And also, like, if Twitter goes away, people will eventually learn however Mastodon works. And then you get into, okay, but how does Mastodon work? Does it work in a good way? One example that I saw, I don't even know if this is true because it seems so ridiculous that I have a hard time believing it and I haven't tested it myself, but I saw somebody say, and people can correct me and follow up, that if you are doing the equivalent of DMing, direct messaging between you and another person on Mastodon, and you @mention another person, they are added to the DM conversation. Like they get sucked into the DM conversation. So you say something nasty about somebody.
The whole conversation.
Yeah, and they get to see everything you said before you @mentioned them as well, right? That is a terrible misfeature. Like that's just bad product design, right? There's always going to be misfeatures in products, but that's why the maturity of the Twitter platform is valuable because they've. I'm not going to say that they learned hard lessons. They did, but also a lot of the features that are in Twitter were sort of pioneered by its users. The use of @mentions, retweets, pioneered by its users and the third-party developers, right? And that process hasn't run long enough on Mastodon for it to work these things out. It also helps that Twitter was a single company, that they could hire product designers and work on it, whereas Mastodon is more distributed and open source project or whatever. And I feel like Mastodon is close. To solve if you wanted to solve the problems that I was citing before of unstable URLs and not a single namespace or whatever, I know people are going to say Web3 and crypto, but please try to keep those words out of your mind when you listen to me say this. What you basically need is a distributed database that keeps track of. So imagine setting up, imagine downloading a client and you downloaded your whatever Mastodon 2 client or whatever. And in the client it comes with this set of configurable servers that are I don't know what the equivalent is. Basically index servers that run on the internet and keep track of where all the Mastodon instances and runs essentially the central namespace, right? And those will change over time, kind of like the root DNS things change. People don't know that their web browsers and their operating systems come with an idea of what the root DNS servers are, or come with the idea of the things that are trustable, the SSL root stuff. That's built into all of our software. No users ever need to configure it, but it is also resilient and decentralized. How does DNS work? How does the SSL signing certificates work? that stuff changes over time and is maintained not by, just Apple or just Microsoft or just Amazon, but users also don't have to deal with it. It's like, how do I configure the DNS roots? How do I configure the trusted root certificates? Like, pretty much users don't have to deal with that. Their phone just connects through SSL or TLS or whatever, right? But that is a decentralized system. And I would point out, none of that uses crypto. You can have a shared database among people and like, but what if someone poisons it? Like, yeah, you get a bunch of people who trust each other through like human relationships and legal contracts, and you can get people to work on a distributed database without, burning the planet down. Anyway, I'm going off on a crypto rant. Like, the whole point is a distributed database is not a foreign thing to the internet. The whole internet works based on that, just based on DNS and TLS certificates alone, right? If that didn't work, nothing would work on the internet, and none of that uses crypto. And that's what something like a Blue Sky type thing or a Mastodon type thing should work. That when you download the client, you don't have to know any of that's going on behind the scenes, but it is resilient against any one company failing. And it can implement a global namespace. Hey, DNS, a global namespace. You can implement a global namespace to give you and stable URLs. Because like, oh, it's stable URL. How does this URL work? Well, when you click on that URL, we distribute the IP address that responds to that URL such that some server will answer on it in your locality and get you the answer to, it's complicated. I'm not saying it's easy. There's a reason no one has done it. And like, how do you incentivize people to do that? Like, because they're not going to do it unless there's money to be made, right? And that's why the Blue Sky thing is kind of like, I think it was Jack Dorsey, like just feeling bad about making Twitter a private company and starting this project to fix it or whatever. And it's probably going to go nowhere, but that's sort of my hope for like the distant future, again, assuming we're not all dead from the water wars, where we come up with a real better solution to this that gives us the value that we got out of Twitter without any of the baggage long after, Twitter 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0 have burned to the ground.
See, I feel like even that distributed ID thing, that is a pipe dream of ever becoming like a significant thing, because here's what would happen. We've seen this pattern over and over again. Here's what always happens. I could go in there and get, marco.org as my ID, and it's like, all right, this is me. This is verified me, and I have some crypto signature that says that
no crypto, and you just get @Marco or @MarcoArment. Like, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than Twitter.
Okay, but then like, what's going to happen? That's going to be too hard for most people to do, and so someone's going to come up with IDs.lol/Marco. And then they're going to say, hey, you can come sign up at IDs.lol and get whatever you want.
What's the too hard part?
The setting up your own like DNS entry or whatever.
You would just download the app and sign. Like the user experience would be exactly like Twitter. You download an app and you sign up and you enter a username and see if it's taken and you make a password. Like, that's it. That's the user experience.
I don't know. But without something central, there are so many potential pitfalls of like abuse, spam, fraud.
Yeah, just like there is in DNS and TLS root certificates. I'm not saying this is easy to do, but it has been done without crypto, a shared database among parties that ostensibly don't trust each other, building trust in ways that do not involve solving Sudokus.
I don't know. That to me, like, that's a very different problem space. Like having how many root certificates are there? And I don't know. I don't know. Maybe like 100.
No, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying we have proof. Like, DNS is the best example. DNS is a single unified namespace with a lot of entries, not just like the number of root certificates. There are a lot of DNS names, and DNS poisoning is a problem, and so on and so forth. And parties don't trust each other, and authoritarian countries have their own weird DNS things where they're screwing stuff up. But if DNS didn't work, nothing would work on the internet. And people, what you're doing, Mastodon, is you're trying to piggyback on DNS to some degree, but that's like, what I'm saying is a system that is like DNS but is not DNS for identity for a service like Twitter. And all the crypto people are screaming their bloody heads off right now. It's like, this is exactly what crypto should be used for. Again,
no, they're all still crying because all their money got stolen / burned to the ground or whatever.
No, it's like I feel
really
like
couldn't have happened to better people.
Yep.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like there's just so many ridiculous downsides to that, and like, we did this in whenever DNS was made in the 60s, 70s. Like, we have a proof of concept that is super important to the underpinnings of the internet. And anything you can say that you're going to say that's why we need crypto, I would just keep pointing at DNS and say they didn't need crypto. But how do they? Well, why don't you ask them? Why don't you ask them how it works? But what about bad actors? But what about DNS poisoning? But what about China? It's like, yeah, those are all problems solvable without destroying the world. Oh God, I'm sorry, crypto people.
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not. Before we move on, I think it's worth, and I don't mean to start a whole nother tangent, but I think it's worth calling out our friend Manton Reese and micro.blog, which has different trade-offs than Mastodon and is different in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I think is very interesting about microblog is that it is really intended to be clear that it's your content and it's your stuff. Now, granted, it's stored on the microblog, servers and so on. But like my microblog, I have a microblog account and it's at lists. But if you go to list.micro.blog, you can find me there. And you can also, if I remember right, micro.kclist.com. I think, yes. That is all my stuff. And when you go to micro.kclist.com, it doesn't redirect. Like it presents as micro.kclist.com. And I think it's really important to Manton that, it's clear that this is your stuff and it lives in kind of your world, and you can tweak it very Tumblr-esque. You can tweak it to your heart's content. And actually, in a lot of ways, it's very similar to Tumblr, but oriented specifically around microblogging. And again, a different set of trade-offs. We need to go into the ins and outs of it right now, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I would verbalize the trade-offs between the two. But it is worth pointing out, and microblog is, from what I can tell, a really, really chill place right now. I think in part because it costs money to join it, and there's something to be said for that. So it might be worth taking a look there as well. And they also, and my understanding of this is very fuzzy, but you can, I guess, present as a Mastodon-friendly account using ActivityPub. You can set up a Mastodon username or something like that, and then that would allow Mastodon users to follow you. And I think you can follow Mastodon users in microblog. Again, I'm very fuzzy on all this, but there's some amount of interoperability between the two, and it's worth checking out. Again, Manton's a friend of ours. Jean McDonald, who I think is their community manager, I think is her title, a dear friend of ours. So I'm biased, but it's worth looking at.
Yeah, and this is the idea of the ActivityPub being the glue that can actually glue together all these services, that's very promising. I hope that kind of thing really takes off. I hope that I'm totally wrong, that this kind of stuff will be too hard for people, and I hope that in a few years we're all talking on different services in a federated world using ActivityPub to communicate between them, and most of them are Mastodon, some of them are microblog. I hope that world comes to be. That would be way better than being all centralized under Twitter in most ways, but I just don't think it's going to turn out that way. The world has shown time and time again that people really value the conveniences and features of centralized, massive services. And I hope I'm wrong. World proved me wrong here, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If you have to provide the same user experience as Twitter, I'm just saying there's a technical way to do that so that the experience is the same, but the underpinnings are not controlled by a single company. That's the trick. Because if you do anything that is actually federated, just even email, you inevitably end up with big companies controlling most people on the service. Most people's email addresses are Hotmail, Gmail, Yahoo, or Reddit, right? And that's despite the fact that email is totally federated. You could run your own email server or whatever, but the world changed in such a way that it's basically impossible to successfully run your own email server, which we talked about in the past, right? And B, most people who aren't tech nerds end up at one of these big companies, right? That's inevitable with any kind of thing that is technically complicated. So the only way to solve that problem, to actually be decentralized, but also have the user experience of centralized, is with something like I was describing, which is very difficult to pull off. We know it can be done, but can it be done in today's environment? Can it be done in the face of, where actual money gets spent? VC companies are not going to fund that, because how do you make money from it? They want the control. They want the information, right? And even if you do that, there are more problems past that. Twitter search, centralized search, is much more difficult to do in the federated world. You end up having to fall all the way back to Google, but you say, that's fine, I'll just use Google. But, centralization of Google as a power on the web is itself a problem, right? But trying to do real-time, the type of real-time, live searches and looking at even just hashtags or anything else, stuff that Twitter is able to pull off because they are a centralized private company, is so much harder to do in a federated world, and is equally hard to do in a world that's trying to look centralized but isn't, because looking centralized is half the battle. Then you have to, the fact that you aren't means you have to now implement these features. Try implementing real-time search such that when somebody tweets, that anyone in the world can see that tweet in their search moments later, in a world where things under the covers are distributed as DNS. If you've played anything with DNS, you know its strength is not making changes visible to everybody very quickly, right? That TTL is very often a lie, and TTL exists for a reason. DNS is not the solution to this. It is just an example of that type of thing. And that's, and the fact that DNS is there, it's why people piggyback on DNS so much. I mean, obviously email does, but even things like Java with the, and that everyone else copied with the reverse DNS naming scheme or whatever. It's like, I have a big problem. I need namespaces for classes in my programming language. I need namespaces for bundle identifiers for my apps. That problem is too big for me to solve. Can I piggyback on DNS? Done. Right? And we just make it the convention, again, not enforced by crypto, that it has to be com.mycompany.myappname, com.mycompany.mycooljava class, right? And then we've just pushed off that problem onto DNS. You cannot push off the Twitter problem onto DNS, but it shows how much value there is that we're able to take this janky, mostly unencrypted, completely insecure, scary, designed in the 70s thing that underpins the entire internet because it is so essential to have something like that. And I just hope someday in my life there is another thing that is like DNS, but better, modernized, but equally decentralized, that can underpin the pipe dream of every company, in our lifetimes, especially Microsoft, of centralized identity on the internet that is not tied to a single company. I forget what it was called when Microsoft first started running that and everybody freaked out, but now everybody takes a little run at it and then runs away screaming. But someday it might happen.
We are brought to you this week by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything. Your products, content you create, even your time. All of this and so much more is not only possible with a Squarespace website, but it's super easy. And you don't have to be a programmer or a server admin or know anything about how to host storefronts or anything like that. They take care of all of that for you. It's just super easy to use. So you focus on your site or your business, and they have so many business features these days. So of course, the basics. You have storefronts. You can sell products, digital or physical goods. They have everything you need, built-in, shipping calculation, tax calculation, inventory management, whatever you might need for selling stuff, they have it. They also allow you to have selling things like your time. If you're maybe a consultant or a trainer and you want to sell time slots, you can do that with Squarespace too. Maybe you're a content creator and you want to have a member area, and that's gated content for members. They support that now. You can have videos, online courses, newsletters with your new member areas with Squarespace. All of this is backed by all the tools you might need to run a business, like analytics. You can see where your visits and your sales are coming from. You can optimize which of your marketing channels are most effective. They support email campaigns. You can collect email subscribers, convert them into loyal customers. You can customize the email template by applying your own brand ingredients and things like that. All of this is backed by great SEO, so you don't have to worry if you're going to be findable in search engines. They have you covered there as well. It's a great place to build any kind of website, especially business websites. So go to squarespace.com/ATP for a free trial. When you're ready to launch, use offer code ATP to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, squarespace.com/ATP. Start that free trial. Use offer code ATP at purchase for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring our show.
Let's do some Ask ATP. Eshu Marniti writes, what's the best way of downloading Xcode? I've heard a lot of mixed opinions/statements about how the Mac App Store one sucks, and some download it via an app called Xcodes. I think it'd be interesting to hear about what you all do and what the differences are. I've done Mac App Store. I've done downloading it directly from the web, and currently my preferred method is the Xcodes app. Xcodes basically does magic to look at what the available versions of Xcode are and makes it basically one-click install or uninstall. And I really dig that, and that's what I've been using for the last few months.
I actually just use the developer website, like developer.apple.com, where you download the betas. I just download it from there. Usually the latest version's available, at least for a little while after it comes out. And so I just download it there. I have previously had the Mac App Store version. I have found that to be much slower to update. And so if you really want to get, I need the latest one right now, it ends up that usually takes a longer time, both to see the update and then also then to actually install the update. It's Xcode is a giant app with tons and tons of files, and whatever the process is through the App Store to update apps, it seems to be significantly slower than just downloading the zip thing from Apple and installing it directly. So I just download the zip files now and from the developer site.
Yeah, I will second that. Do not do the Mac App Store. I think the Mac App Store is mostly doing the same thing that has to be done by any of the techniques, but the Mac App Store is so bad at giving you any progress indication and so bad about letting you like pause and resume the thing. I haven't actually used Xcodes. I just go to developer.apple.com, go to the download section. You will get a file that ends in .xip. That's the zip file. We're saying is an X instead of a Z. It's a .xip. And downloading that file takes a long time depending on your internet connection because it's very large, right? Decompressing / verifying the signatures of that file, un-XIPing it, unzipping it, takes so long. And I love that to be a step that I can take, because downloading it just downloads into your download folder and it sits there. And you can let it sit there for an hour or a day and come back tomorrow. Unzipping it, un-XIPing it also takes a long time. While you're doing that, I can be in Xcode doing stuff while that is just running. And then it unzips. And then maybe the next day I come and finally quit Xcode. I was going to say drag the old one out of my applications folder and put it in the garbage, but don't do that. Listen to me for a second. Recursively remove the existing Xcode with the RM command from the command line because it is so much faster to do that than to empty the trash in your Finder. See past episodes where we talked about this, right? And then drag the new one from downloads, right? And so that process I may do in a leisurely pace and I'm not in a big hurry over the course of 1 or 2 days. And at no point during that process am I stuck that I can't do development work. So that's why I always go and download the thing myself, uncompress the thing myself, and swap it in for the other one myself. Because the tools to do those individual tasks are easy. It's easy to download something, use the browser of your choice, use whatever download thing, use wget, like whatever, well, wget might be hard with the authentication. But anyway, download it. Unzip it. There's one application on your Mac that's going to do that. It's going to have a progress bar. You can watch it, let it sit there, and then swap it for the old one. Tons of ways to do that. You could do it in the Finder if you wanted. You could do it like me and recursively remove very carefully the previous one, and then put the new one in its place. That's my preferred technique. But whatever you do, don't do the Mac App Store because it takes a really long time and you have no control over it, and it's not fun.
I would encourage you and the listeners to try Xcodes because it doesn't.
Yeah, I should. I hadn't actually heard of it. I'm gonna get that now.
It's very, very good. And
is that like safe? Like I don't like the idea of having anybody get between me and Apple with Xcode. Like that's a pretty high risk thing.
Yeah,
I understand that.
What about what is it? The Ritchie paper, Thoughts on Trusting Trust. Someone in the chat room get me that one. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, no, I know what you're thinking of. But no, I think it's safe. I mean, it's all open source.
I mean, look, it probably is safe, but like it's just like how much am I willing to outsource the acquisition of Xcode to some third party? I don't know. To me, that trade-off is not worth it.
That's fair. I personally don't see it as a particular problem because this is such a popular tool, and I presume somebody has gone through it. Maybe not, but I presume somebody hasn't, certainly.
I mean, the popular tool means that if someone has exploited it, you're hoping that someone else is going to be the sucker that finds out, and you'll read about it and before that. And where would you read about it? Probably on Twitter because you see the updates in real time and it's not federated.
Oh man, one of these days we're not going to talk about Twitter, right? Maybe one day. Anyway, that I would seriously recommend checking it out. And like I said, spelunking through the source code if you really fancy it. Claude Zines writes, "What do you think is the best designed Mac app that Apple currently makes?" And for probably Syracusa, what do you think is the best designed Mac app that Apple has ever made? For me, I honestly don't know. I really don't. I was been thinking about this on and off, and I'm not actively bothered by many of Apple's apps except music, and home to some degree. But I don't think that I can think of any shining example of something really, really good. I think Notes is close. I mean, it's not crazy powerful and it has some things I wish I could change, but it's pretty darn good. So maybe I would say Notes, but I'm hoping one of you is going to come up with something and I'm going to say, oh, no, that's my answer. So I think we started with Marco first last time. So John, what's a good one?
Start with me because John's going to have the right answer. I'm only going to have wrong answers.
That's fair. Okay. No, that's fair.
I think we're both going to have, well, go ahead. Well, I think we want to have there's at least one mediocre answer that Casey will like.
Yeah. So I think Home is the best designed app.
I hope you're kidding. I hope you're kidding so badly.
Yeah, of course.
Oh
No,
my gosh.
I don't know. I also thought of Notes. I feel like if you're looking at, Apple has many styles they've used over time. Notes, I think, is the best example of Apple's current style, where they're very iOS-y. Notes is very iOS styled, but it's still very functional as a Mac app. But I would say, I think I like better than Notes. I think I like Mail. For being a kind of more Mac-like experience, I think Mail is that. That being said, I'm not in Ventura yet, so I don't know if Ventura Mail is maybe worse in some way. But
it's better and worse, I'd say.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, anyway, and I almost thought of maybe saying Safari, but I don't know. It's really hard because what Apple design means changes over time, and I think on the Mac especially, they're not currently in a very good place. So I don't know. John, what's the right answer?
I'm surprised that there was so much waffling about this. Like, I think there's probably a better answer than the one I'm going to give, but the one that immediately sprung to my mind is Safari. Like, Safari is a Mackie Mac app. I don't think it makes any unforced errors. Like, there's no, like, super obvious annoyance that's been there for years that we all hate. And most of the things it does really well and in a Mac-like way. Just think about things like, oh, can I drag an image off of the thing? What can I do with the address bar? How do the preferences work? How do the tabs work? Like, it's a really good Mac. It always has been a really good Mac app, even as the times have changed. And yeah, it's just a web browser, and we kind of take it for granted. But I think that's part of its strength. Like, you don't spend a lot of your time just grinding it. Maybe the people who wanted the color fave icons and tabs were grinding their teeth, but that's solved now too. Like, that's the easy answer. I think there's probably a better one. I'm scrolling through my applications folder to try to like jog my memory. There's probably something that is better, but I wouldn't pick Notes because I feel like Notes, for all its great features and everything, it's like, what I would consider like an okay third-party application. Like, but Safari, there is, like, when I think of, well, if there was a third-party browser that used WebKit or whatever, setting aside the engine, they could make a much better thing than this. Much more full-featured, more interesting, more whimsical, more surprise and delight, more, more better done. And I don't think that's possible. I think Safari really just does not make any, doesn't put a foot wrong for the most part. It does what it does, and it does what it does really well. So that's my easy answer. And I think
that's mostly a good answer. I'd mostly agree with that.
And Mail, like, the reason I think that's not true is Mail is kind of like Notes in that it's a good bundled application to have a basic mail client. But geez, any good third-party mail client from the past, you would say, is better than it. Even hell, MimeStream today is probably better than it. And certainly something like the Entourage, or like in those days, like, I don't know, it's not comparable because it's an ancient era or whatever, but like, Entourage or, Claris email stomps all over current Apple Mail in a million different ways in terms of kind of like comparing, like, athletes from their eras, right? Claris email and Entourage in their era stood so much taller above their contemporary apps than does Apple Mail today. Not that Apple Mail is a bad application, but geez, it is not the best one Apple makes. And then in terms of what's the best design Mac app that Apple has ever made, that's tough. My easy answer for that is the classic macOS Finder, probably peaking around about the time that pop-up tab folders came into being, and most of the annoying problems were out, because I think that was, again, an example of an app that had just been polished within an inch of its life and had just recently gotten some really new features, and most of the bad things about it, like not being able to copy more than one thing to a floppy disk at a time, had been solved, right? Obviously, a different era, no memory protection, blah, 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 but that's my sentimental favorite. There's probably, again, some other things that I'm not thinking of in the past, but, classic Mac Finder, circa macOS 8 or 9-ish is probably my answer for best design Mac app ever made. And kind of like Safari, you take it for granted. People don't even think of it as an app. It's like, and the reason you take it for granted is it just did what it needed to do in a way that everybody understood. And as long as it didn't crash, you're like, oh, Finder, that's not even an app. That's just the way my computer works. And that, I feel like, is an achievement in itself.
Finally, Andrew Larson writes, I was listening to the episode of Rec Diffs where John was explaining to Merlin the reasons for leaving his job, and I picked up on a line about how a good boss will work with you on family issues you might be having. Elon.
Yeah,
it was my understanding that you have all once had the privilege of leading people, or at a minimum, you've been on teams of people led by someone. Personally, I'm new to leading people. What advice would you give to someone who is new to leadership from the perspective of some pretty talented people who have led or been led by someone tech or non-tech related? I've never led anyone. I never had any sort of like subordinate when I was working. And
well, you'd be. I think Marco leads himself, and his employee is a jerk. It's the worst employee you have to deal with. I know that's not the question, but like being your own boss is actually kind of a form of leadership, and you have to lead yourself, which is actually a fairly difficult thing to do. Not to sidetrack this, but even if you think you, Casey, or you, Marco, have never like led a team of other developers to do a thing, leadership experience is relevant for being self-employed as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very different skill, though. Like they're both hard problems, but these are both very different problems.
Also, I think there's two different versions of lead, right? I read this as like being a HR leader, like or a boss, basically.
A people manager.
Right, thank you.
Having reports.
Exactly. I've never been in that position, but I was what the companies I was in typically called a tech lead for many, many, many different times. And I certainly have thoughts on that if that's where Andrew was going with this. But I read that more as people manager, not technical leader.
Yeah, so I've been both of those things. I've done tech leads, I've been a people manager, and I've been both at the same time for the same people. Sometimes I've been those same things at the same time for different people, which I think is the most difficult, where you have a team of people reporting to you, and also you're a tech lead for a larger, only slightly overlapping thing. But yeah, I think this is mostly a people management thing. There's a reason I have not been a people manager most of the time. It's because I don't think that's where my skills lie. At various times, based on the promotional ladder at various companies, sometimes you can't avoid being a people manager if you want to get promoted, or you get, not forced into the situation, but, offered a quote unquote promotion that makes you a people manager as part of your responsibilities, and you feel like you have to take it to advance your career. And that will show you whether you think you have any kind of aptitude for it. But, it's a very difficult job, and the skills required for it are different than the skills required for being a developer. But there is a lot of overlap because as a developer, as we've talked about in past shows, you have to learn how to communicate and work with people. No, they're not your reports, but you have to communicate and work with your peers. You have to communicate upward in the org chart, downwards and sideways. That's part of your job as a developer, and it's an increasing part of your job as a developer as you, become more experienced and sort of climb the corporate ladder and gain more responsibility. And at no point are you a people manager in there, but you still have to have those people skills. Being a people manager requires those same people skills, and then much more on top of that, because now you're responsible for people. Like you're responsible for their well-being, you're responsible for their performance, you're responsible for getting them promoted when they do a good job and dealing with it when they don't do a bad job. And it is a huge amount of responsibility and a very difficult job. And some people thrive in that environment and love it and become better at it, and other people run screaming from it. So the first thing I would say is figure out whether this is a thing you want to do. Because I know it might seem like you have no choice because to get promoted, you have to become a people manager. But I can tell you that you can find companies where there is an individual contributor track that you can still get promoted on and not have to have people report to you. But if you do find that you like it, even if you're very bad at it in the beginning, and you absolutely will be, just like everyone is a crappy programmer in the beginning, everybody is a crappy manager in the beginning. What you want to do is learn how to not be a crappy manager. And that is a long road. And it is very much learning, it's kind of like being a parent. You're not a good parent in the beginning. Nobody is. You have no idea what you're doing. But hopefully you learn over time, and hopefully you don't screw up your kids too much along the way. It's exactly the same way with reports. Your first reports, you're probably going to make tons and tons of mistakes. Learn from them. Be empathetic. Be a human being. Don't be, don't be as cold and callous as Elon Musk. Don't buy into the toxic things you may think about productivity and, workaholism, and avoid any authoritarian impulse you have. These are also this is also advice for parenting. Avoid any authoritarian impulse you may have. Avoid trying to take lessons from your own upbringing and your own bad bosses in the past, and replaying those things out and replaying those traumas out to your current reports. And that's a lot of work. That is a lot of, as they say, emotional labor, where you have to moderate yourself and your feelings to achieve a goal within the company, because you can't, your job is not to throw a tantrum or start screaming at people, even though you might feel very frustrated, because that's why you're the manager. And if your employee starts screaming and everything, you as a manager have to learn how to deal with that. So if I was better at being a people manager, I would have more actionable advice, but all I can tell you is here's the shape of the territory, and it is a very difficult skill and you're going to be bad at it. But if you think it's something that you might enjoy, it is possible to get good at it, probably by asking somebody other than me how to do so.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Squarespace, Trade Coffee, and Linode. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can join atp.fm/join. We will talk to you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS, so that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
What do we got for an after show?
Who did something exciting this week?
I don't know. I got nothing.
I don't know either. I'm working on a database. Like, it's just not...
Working on a database? What are you doing?
Well, I'm working on two databases, actually. So I'm working on the Overcast side, on the server side. I've actually reached a fairly stable point in the Overcast server story. So since we last talked about this, I've been doing a lot of optimization on the server side. Like, I mentioned I had that one giant table that matched users to episodes, and it was like by far my biggest table, and it was like hundreds of gigs, including hundreds of gigs of indexes. Over the last month or so, I've gotten database loads way down, mostly from index consolidation on that table. So it used to have, I think, like 3 or 4 different indexes that different things would query. Now it has one index that I rewrote all the server-side code to just use one index, like, to always query for these 3 columns, like user ID, podcast ID, episode ID. Like every query can use that index now, so I don't have to have a separate one for like, all right, if I only have a podcast ID, use this index. Like there's nothing like that anymore. I took recommendation indexing out of that, so I don't have to have a recommended index on that. Anyway, all that has dramatically reduced the load on that server, and so I've bought myself some time. I've also gotten away from the situation where I had, I discussed months ago, I was using S3 and S3 compatible things like Linode object storage and Cloudflare in front of all that, trying to shift like the list of episodes in a podcast, trying to shift that onto a CDN in some way, or S3 fronted by a CDN. And that's largely what I was doing all summer as like my various efforts to try to lighten the server load, and that plan just hasn't gone very well. I ran into a number of problems. So using actual S3, having Cloudflare in front of it helps a lot, but even just like the write traffic to it was so excessive. I ended up paying a lot just for writes to S3. So I switched over to Linode object storage about halfway through the summer. And it was much better there because it was way cheaper. Still having Cloudflare in front of it and everything. But then I was hitting bugs of like, when you have a level of caching in front of your database in some way, it's all right. So I in my code I would like, all right, every time some episode data about a podcast changed, I would rewrite that record to the CDN. Or at first I rewrite it to like Linode object storage. And I would increment a version number, so that way the next time the app fetched it would get a different URL because it had like the version number at the end, which would invalidate the CDN, so it would bypass it. Anyway, but then what happens if the write fails to the object storage? now I have out-of-date data, and I can either like blow up the crawl process and throw an exception so it doesn't write anything, or what if there's like a small race where like right after the object storage is updated, what if the CDN goes to read it and gets stale data? Then it has cached stale data. And so I had all these like weird edge case bugs that were causing occasional problems, and dealing with this system ended up being so much more complex and so much more involved than not having it in the first place. So what I did now is I eliminated the object storage layer of this stack. Now I just have a server process, like a server method that reads the data out of the database and serves it, and I have Cloudflare in front of that providing a short-lived cache. Again, server load is not meaningfully higher with that, but I've gotten rid of a whole bunch of bugs. So I'm at a point now where I think I'm stable, much more stable than before, and I bought myself some time so I can finally stop working on my servers every single day and focus on something else.
I have some bad news for you about that. I mean, you already know the news because you've done this before, but like this reminds me of one of my past jobs where basically the entire history of the company was doing what you just described every year or two. Just forever, like literally forever, because like you would think you're like, now I've done this thing where I've rearranged stuff in the database and did all the type of things you described, like move this from over there and we thought this would help, but it didn't, put this back here, and now I feel like I'm in a stable place. And it's just start a timer, because then it's like, I mean, only if your growth continues, obviously. This company was growing constantly, like 30% year over year. It's like, you're going to be doing all that again. And every time you think, now there's no more, I can't get any more blood from this stone, I've wrung out all the efficiency. It's like, guess what? In a year and a half, you're going to be back at the same place, and you're going to surprise yourself by finding even more stuff you can wring out, and then keep going and keep going. It's like it literally never ends. It's like just the growth continues, and you find new ways to make your relational database survive the load that you thought it could never survive by doing increasingly clever things. And just that's the treadmill. Although I suppose you want to get off that treadmill by going to CloudKit eventually, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I think is worth context here is that Overcast is not growing very much. Like I'm not losing people, but I'm also not growing very aggressively. It's a very, very slow growth.
Well, you're not growing in customers, but like as you noted when you were messing with this, and maybe one of the private things, the activity pattern of the existing users can change in response to things you don't control, like Patreon podcasts or whatever.
Yes. So like one thing I learned is that like as I was instrumenting various things and collecting stats in various ways, I noticed and I kind of knew this already, but I didn't know quite to what degree, that Patreon feed updates are I think like 3/4 of my feed updates or half. Like it's some absurd amount of my feed updates are just Patreon feeds. And so that's something that has changed over the last few years, that between Patreon and Substack and Ben Thompson stuff.
And why we're Patreon? Is it because you have tons of people subscribing to Patreon things? It's because the URLs are all unique per person, right?
Not only are they all unique per person, but Patreon has time-bombed URLs in their as their enclosure URLs, so that every time you fetch the feed, every item has changes in it.
That's miserable.
Yes, it sure is. So one of the optimizations a while ago, I did a thing where I have I used to, for a brief period, to try to solve that problem, I sent all download URLs for the enclosure through a redirect that was fixed on Overcast. It would be like overcast.fm/download/big hash, and that would never change. And so all the sync updates that would happen, that hey, something about this feed has changed, and so your copy of the app has to download a whole new copy of the feed. All those updates were saved if all that changed was the enclosure URL on all these Patreon feeds. Well, that ended up causing some problems occasionally with certain things, and so I turned it off a few months ago, but I turned it back on now only for feeds where I think it's necessary. So there's heuristics that run where it's under certain conditions, it will now redirect downloads through that kind of URL. And Patreon is one of those things where it's if you have a private feed it has under a certain number of subscribers, I will redirect it through these URLs. That way, again, they stay fixed and we stop having to send all these duplicate updates. And so I basically spent, a few weeks doing stuff like that, of simplifying, getting rid of some of the tricks that didn't work with the object storage, reintroducing an old trick that worked with this download URL thing, tweaking some of the Patreon refresh times and things like that, and optimizing various parts of my crawling process. Like it used to hit the database for getting all the list of items. It used to hit it twice. Now it hits it once. That made crawling faster and lightened the load on a major database. Like there's stuff like that. I was doing stuff like that, optimizing the different things, index consolidation on that one big database table. So now that's, I think, stable. And so I've been actually spending the last few days working on a replacement for FC Model. FC Model is my old Objective-C SQLite kind of model layer that Overcast uses, and a couple other things, I think including Castor. I think they ended up using it too. But anyway, it's just this little open source library. Nobody should use it now. It's outdated now. And it's very Objective-C and so I've wanted for a while to remake it using modern Swift stuff, modern Swift concurrency. And the reason I hadn't remade it yet is, frankly, I just didn't think I knew Swift well enough to really do a good job of it. Now I think I finally do, and so I've been remaking a new model layer using Swift and Swift concurrency that will be the foundation for hopefully the next version of Overcast.
Is it too much to hope that you're writing unit tests for this thing? Because it's a library. Come on, it's a super important library. Now is the time to whip out those tests.
In all fairness, FC Model is the only other time I've written tests.
That's what I'm saying. This is the time. It's time for testing to shine.
Yeah. So I will.
That's not an answer.
I plan to maybe someday write tests for this.
That's a no.
I want tests to exist. I just don't want to be the one to write them.
Exactly.
There you go. But yeah. So and this one. So I'm writing directly against SQLite this time. Like before, I used Gus Mueller's excellent FMDB library, which was a great SQLite bridge to Objective-C, and FC Model is based on that. Now I'm eliminating the middle layer and just writing Swift directly to SQLite API.
Isn't there one? I was just thinking of this when you were talking about it. Isn't there like a existing popular shim layer that basically puts a Swift front end on the SQLite C API?
Yeah, there's a couple of them, and I'm using none of them because that's me.
But I thought there was like one popular one that's actually really thin, so you wouldn't have to rewrite that. But oh well.
Have you met Marco?
I know
the API is not the SQLite API is not that, and especially because like I'm not using all of the features of SQLite. Mm-hmm. I'm using a very small subset of them, so it really is not that bad. Like it's not. I don't really need a whole big library that shims the entire API of SQLite for what I'm doing. Like I really need something very, very basic and limited. And so anyway, so just writing directly against the API I thought was better for my needs and my preferences and my style, and it allows me to only have what I actually need and to know how every bit of it works. And I can make decisions like, my concurrency story here is using the new Swift actor concept, which is a bit of a pain in the butt in certain ways, but I'm really happy with some of the ways it performs and some of the guarantees that it makes and everything. And I'm using all modern conventions everywhere of like, using async stuff to fetch everything, using exception throwing instead of, random assertions that could fail in weird ways, like, doing everything kind of the newest, most modern way.
How are you finding calling into the SQLite C APIs from Swift? Do you have a lot of unsafe this and unsafe that everywhere in your code?
Shockingly, no. I have almost none. It's really weird, like how little of that I needed. Swift is really good now at kind of marshaling stuff in and out of C libraries, and I don't know if this is, if the SQLite API just has a bunch of good annotations or whatever. I think it's just Swift has matured to the point where it does a lot of this stuff automatically for you, or at least with very little drama, and there's very little of that like ugly, unsafe pointer stuff necessary.
Oh, I'll be interested. Is this going to be open source like FC Model was?
I don't know yet. Open sourcing FC Model, I'm not sure that was really worth it. In the sense that, like, I did occasionally, I got like one or two bug fixes from people over time from that, and that was worth it to make it better. But I'm not sure I want the liability of like my stuff being used as such a foundational layer in other people's apps. And if I don't open source it, not only does that reduce, my feel bad burden about what if I break your app, but it also gives me more flexibility to change it more dramatically over time. Like if I decide, hey, you know what, this API is actually kind of clunky. I want to rework the way this thing is called or deprecate this other thing. Like I can just make sure my one app is okay with that, or modify my one app to use the new calling convention, and then that's it. I don't have to worry about that. So I might open source it eventually, but I want to. I'm not going to open source it yet, and possibly never. But I don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, for something this obscure within the smallish community of like developers who might be interested in this, you can just throw it out there and just like never, like basically have a README that says, I don't support this, I don't maintain it. If you want to do something with it, feel free, but don't send me bugs. Don't, I'm gonna break it, and it's gonna break your crap. Tough, like, just like a big disclaimer. And we've talked in past shows about how you can't actually do that because people expect you to maintain it no matter what. But I think the audience for this is small enough that you might be able to get away with basically the chuck it over the wall and then just continue to do exactly what you said. Oh, guess what? I've decided this API needs to change, and I don't care how many other people's apps it breaks because they should know that I'm not supporting this. And if that leads people to take your code and fork it, then it's also not your problem. Like you can make it not your problem while still having it, out there for the internet as sort of a public good.
I mean, the other thing though is like, if someone's out there looking for a Swift SQLite or database library, they should probably use one of the bigger ones. That's what
I was going to say is what you should do while you're writing your library is look at the other ones at least. Look at the one function that you're going to write your version of and see if there's any edge case that they know about that you don't know about. That's the benefit to the world of the having it open source. It's just like, hey, if someone cares, they can go look at it and learn something about, the ins and outs of interfacing SQLite from Swift, right? And that's the benefit you'd be providing. And what you're basically saying is I take no responsibility. If you use this in your app and I break it, don't come crying to me. I don't even need your bug reports, but I do want it to just be out there as yet another Google hit for someone looking for how might one do a Swift front end to SQLite.
That's interesting. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Plus, do you or do you not want unit tests? Because if you open source it, there's at least a prayer.
You make other people write your tests for you.
Yeah, there's at least a chance that you'll get a unit test.
Casey will write them for you.
Will he? If that's a deal, then maybe I'll open source it.
Writing unit tests for a database interface layer is like how I spent half my career. I do not want to do that again voluntarily.
It sounds fun, doesn't it?
Oh, so fun. So much fun.
Well, that's the thing is that then you start getting into the fine line of like, is it a unit test or an integration test? Like, what is this?
Exactly. Well, at least with SQLite, you don't have to start a database server.
Yeah, that's true.
The difference between mocking a database and having an actual SQLite, especially if it's an in-memory database with no file on disk, it's real blurry.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's interesting nonetheless. And honestly, as I was sitting here listening to you, like I've never had the occasion, not once in my career, of using SQLite, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but I am very, very interested in Swift concurrency and async await and stuff like that. And I don't think, like, I understand it and I'm okay at it, but I wouldn't say I'm particularly strong at it. So I would be interested in looking at this, not necessarily for the database stuff, not necessarily to use it, but more to kind of crib and understand, well, how does Marco approach async await and concurrency and actors and things like that? And to help my understanding of these things, which I think is passable, but not, super strong. And if you are in the position that you feel like you are at least reasonably strong at those things, then that's something that people like me or anyone else could learn from.
Oh, you really kind of also have to see the use of it, because with async and with actors and things like sendable and all that, there is the possibility that it starts to, I'm not going to say infect, but okay, fine, that it starts to affect with the letter A, the code that uses it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Right, and like making an API such that the tendrils of that are confined to where you want them to be. Like, it is appropriate for this to make the calling code be shaped like this, but it is not appropriate for it to just like thread through your entire application because something has to be sendable all the way up to the top. You know what I mean? And just seeing the library doesn't let you know that. Like, Marco will find that out when he tries to go use his library in his app and finds out that he has to like go up 17 levels in the call stack to thread something through and make everything all async. But that's the thing you only learn from using the library in an application.
Yeah, and that's one thing, by the way. Like, it's a pretty strong choice to make all of your database calls go on an actor because it's on a custom actor because that means that anything that calls into it to make a database query has to be from an async context. So that there's no good way to block and just wait till you get this. Like there's a few crappy ways, but basically all of the calling code to use this is going to have to be async. And that is going to be a big pain in the butt at certain times. But where I arrive at the end of all that is going to be really great. And so that's why this is like, I'm kind of starting this out small. I'm going to try to start writing like a couple of subsystems of the app using this before I really replace all of my old model code with it. And that's going to be a months-long project. That's going to involve probably lots of rewriting of the app. And that's no small job. So that's why this is kind of like a side project right now. It's kind of in like the skunkworks area of Overcast right now. And I'll probably ship some little thing behind the scenes using it soon, but it's going to be a while before it's like the main database of the app. But it got to start sometime.
Yeah.
That's where you need those unit tests that stress test stress test the concurrency in ridiculous ways, because you don't want to find that out when you're in your application. Like, finally, I've got everything all async, but now there's a weird bug and I don't understand it. It's like, put the torture tests into your unit tests that have people, adding and removing things simultaneously as fast as they can while something else tries to do a regular operation, and make sure that it ends up in a sensible state afterwards. And like, find those bugs in your unit tests, because trying to find them in your actual application is going to be bad. And obviously, actors and all that is much better than threads, and is probably even better than Grand Central Dispatch. Like, there's a reason the technology for async on Apple platforms has gotten better and better over time. So hopefully you'll be mostly protected by that by doing best practices. But actors are still relatively new to Apple's platform, so it's a good idea to actually have some kind of stress test that is not, I'll just run my application and see if it works.